Why can't I find 249? Because you're in health. Waiting for you, Griff.
Sorry, you are all set, Senator.
All right, welcome to the Senate Natural Energy and Natural Resources Committee. I'm Senator Kevin Abard from District 12. And before we get started, I'll read through the checklist to ensure that our meeting we're holding is in compliance to right to know law. As Chair of State Energy and Natural Resources, I find that due to the state of emergency declared by the governor as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and in accordance with the governor's emergency orders number 12, pursuant to Executive Order 2020-04 and its extensions, this public body is authorized to meet electronically. Please note that there is no physical location to observe and listen contemporaneously to this meeting, which was authorized pursuant to the governor's emergency order. In accordance with the emergency order, I'm confirming that we're providing public access to the meeting by telephone, with additional access possible by video and electronic means. We're utilizing Zoom for electronic meetings, and all members of the committee and selective legislative staff have the ability to communicate contemporaneously in this meeting through this platform, and the public has access to contemporaneously watch and listen to the meeting on Zoom or YouTube via phone by following the directions and the links provided in the General Court website. We provided public notice of the necessary information in accordance to the meeting in the Senate calendar, and we're providing a mechanism for the public to alert the public body during the meeting if there are any problems with access. If anyone has a problem, please email remote-senate@legstate.nh.us or call 603-271-6931. That's remote-senate@leg.state.nh.us.
Yeah, well, that's right. So you mentioned something. I'm still looking at this tax.
Okay, hello. We're in the middle of doing something. Could you mute yourself, please? Thank you, thank you. In the event that the public is unable to access the meeting, it will be adjourned and rescheduled. Please note that all votes taken during this meeting shall be done by roll call vote. And finally, let's start the meeting by taking a roll call attendance. When each member states their presence, please also state where they are and if anyone else is in the room with you during this meeting, which is required under the right to know law. So I'll begin the roll with Senator Gaida. Senator Gaida, are you there?
Senator Gaida is alone in his office in the State House.
Senator Gray.
This is Senator Gray, District 6. I'm in my home in Rochester and I'm alone in this room.
Senator Waters. There you are, Senator Waters. Senator Waters.
Mr. Chairman, Senator David Waters at home in Dover, alone in this room.
Wonderful. Senator Perkins Quokka.
Hi, this is Senator Perkins Quokka. I'm at my home in Portsmouth and I'm alone in the room.
And Senator Kevin Abard. I'm in my office, District 12 here in Nashua, with a couple of very boisterous puppies. And my wife is off today, so she'll be in and out of the house. So
Move
with
to go
that,
into executive session.
is there a second?
Second.
Roll call. Senator Gray.
Yes.
Senator Gaida.
Yes.
Senator Waters.
Yes.
Senator Perkins Quokka.
Yes.
Senator Abard, yes. Is there a motion on HB 249?
Move ought to pass on HB 249.
Second.
Is there discussion? Seeing none. Senator Gray.
Yes.
Senator Gaida.
Yes.
Senator Waters.
Yes.
Senator Perkins Quokka.
Yes.
Senator Abard, yes. Is there another motion?
Move consent.
Second.
Senator Gray.
Yes.
Senator Perkins Quokka.
Yes.
Senator Waters.
Yes.
Senator Gaida.
Yes.
Senator Abard, yes. Is there a motion to move out of exec? Oh,
Move.
Senator Gray, would you like to take that out?
No, but I will.
right. All right. And Senator Gray, the motion's to move out of exec, seconded by
Yes.
Senator Gaida. Senator Gray,
Yes.
Senator Gaida,
Yes.
Senator Waters,
Yes.
Senator Perkins Coca,
Yes.
Senator Avard. Yes, so that was fun. Well, today we have a very interesting day. I just want to let everybody know that we have approximately 50 speakers. We have thousands of emails and a lot of information. So Cameron's going to be in charge, and he's going to let you know how long you get to speak, and it's going to be generally around 2 minutes and 30 seconds because of the number. But legislators will have, and executive departments will have a little extra time. And so with that, we're going to listen to the prime sponsor.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
you were going to remind the public that they should not repeat testimony of previous speakers.
I'm going to remind everybody not to repeat themselves, just like you did. But I thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Senator Gray. But
begging your pardon, sir, I have to be attending Senate Finance, so I'll excuse myself at this time. Thank you.
really appreciate your service, sir. All right, take care. And with that, Cameron, thank you if you're in charge.
Okay, so the prime sponsor is Representative Tucker. Representative Tucker, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Welcome, Representative Tucker.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for your service on natural resources, as I think of it, and energy rather than the other way around. So I submitted some testimony and a rendering of the site on Friday. But then yesterday, after I had a very nice Mother's Day lunch, I went over to the lake and to the Forest Lake State Park and walked in around the locked gate, which is legal, and looked over down to the mountains. You see Mount Lafayette, Cannon Mountain, the Twin Mountains, and across the lake. And I thought about what I hadn't put in my testimony. And I decided that I should bring up what I hadn't thought to do. And that is that Forest Lake is one of the few state parks that has enough appropriate terrain and enough space to add a campground. You know, some of our parks have campgrounds, many do not. And this site is one where our state parks director has said that it is possible and it would be very attractive to have a campground developed there. And campgrounds apparently are a lot more popular and enjoyed by families that have swimming. So I thought really I ought to bring that up because some are saying that really the thing that's wrong with this bill, HB 177, is that there aren't very many places that landfills could be located in all of New Hampshire. And we shouldn't give up a site that is possible. Whereas I'm thinking that really there aren't very many state parks that are already owned by the state of New Hampshire where you could build a campground in the North Country particularly. So I want to bring that to your attention. The swimming, the fishing, the boating is a very major part of that location. So it's a great place for to think about putting a campground in the future. And I just don't think that people would want a campground next to a developed landfill at the size and scale that landfills are today. So different than the old town dumps when I was a youngster. And the other thing that I began thinking about, in addition to what I have sent you in writing, is that really this is a major choice that you have before you and the Senate as a whole will have. And I think that it gives you an opportunity to put yourself in the same kind of category of a John W. Weeks, a Lancaster native, who voted for and managed to get through Congress in 1911, the Weeks Act, which allows national forests to be built east of the Mississippi. I think it's in that category. It puts you in the same category of the people who fought successfully to keep a highway from being built on the presidential range, which is in my district, COAS 5. As you probably know, Franklin Delano Roosevelt had a plan as part of the Works program to put a highway across the whole range, more or less on the route of the Gulf Side Trail. And I think we can be very grateful that people fought that idea and we don't have a highway joining Adams and Madison and Jefferson and Washington and Monroe. And I think it also puts you on the same page as Spinneth, President Forrester, Philip Ayres, and the State Federation of Women's Clubs and the school children of New Hampshire, who worked together to save Franconia Notch and have a state park there. I think this bill is about the importance of state parks, and it's a chance for us all, particularly after the pandemic and our experience with how very important the outdoors is in New Hampshire to the people who live here and the people who visit here.
Representative Tucker, could you tell the public exactly what the bill does?
The bill, I'm sorry, I should have done that. The bill would prohibit any landfill anywhere in the state of New Hampshire to be placed within 2 miles of a state park. There is a proposal to do that at Forest Lake State Park in Whitefield and Dalton. But I think it's important to recognize that this is not just about that particular park. It would protect all state parks in the state of New Hampshire. And I think we all understand now how very important state parks are. So I have submitted written testimony, also talking about the importance of tourism in the North Country. I think tourism across the state is very important. It's the second or third largest industry, depending on exactly what you count as tourism. And so I know you have a lot of people to hear from today. I'm very pleased to be prime sponsor. This is something that's very important to the district I'm in. And I think it's been marvelous to have such bipartisan support. And so I rest my case and I finish my testimony. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative, and thank you for your service. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next person I have is Senator Aaron Hennessey. Senator Hennessey?
Welcome, Senator Hennessey.
Thank you, Chairman Avard and honorable members of the Senate Committee. I really appreciate the time you're taking to hear from all of us today on HB 177. I am Aaron Hennessey, State Senator for District 1, home to many of New Hampshire's beautiful state parks. I'm here to advocate on behalf of the vast majority of my constituents, my towns, and many organizations within my district who have reached out in support of protecting a big part of New Hampshire's advantage, our state parks. Our state parks are a treasure for those of us who live here and for those of other states who visit our wonderful state of New Hampshire. Without this legislation, our state currently allows a landfill to be built within 100 feet of any abutter, which would include state parks. The 2-mile buffer is a reasonable standard that many states have already enacted. Some have enacted standards that are actually larger than 2 miles. So what would this 2-mile buffer help to do for our state parks? Help to protect wetlands, help to protect water quality in their lakes and streams and rivers, help to protect air quality, help to protect our wildlife habitat, help to protect property values, it would help to protect any negative visual impact from a landfill, any negative noise or odors that people experience from landfills. And in my particular instance, in a state park in my district, around Forest Lake, if a landfill were to be built there, it would help to actually protect 3 different elementary schools from the trucks that would be coming in and going directly past these elementary schools. So I am reaching out to you today to ask that you vote in favor of passing this important legislation. We all know that it just takes one instant to get somebody to start thinking about legislation. And unfortunately, that instance is a landfill that wants to be built around a state park in my district, but it could be in your district as well. So I want you to think about that. And I really appreciate your time today. And I am happy to take any quick questions if you have any. If not, I have to get off to Senate Finance.
Thank you, Senator. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you very much, Senator. Appreciate
Thank you. The next person I have is Representative Howard Pearl. Representative Pearl, you should be able to unmute.
Representative, welcome.
Good afternoon, and appreciate the Senate and Energy Natural Resources Committee gathering today to hear this important bill. So I've come to today to testify against this bill, and I'm here to uphold the committee, the Environment and Agricultural Committee position of we had asked for an ITL. So the committee, we received a lot of testimony, as you're going to. I heard you had 50 or so people to testify, and that sounds about right from what we had. But our committee, when we heard this, the majority of the committee felt that this really was a bill that dealt with a proposed project in Dalton. We felt that it some of the issues is that it violated landowner rights. It was using the legislative process as a means to stop this particular project near the Forest Lake State Park. We felt this was a local zoning issue and that it should not receive special treatment through the RSA process. The bill really does nothing to protect surface and groundwater specifically, and it doesn't do anything to protect private property or business owners. We had concerns that it was a spot zoning bill and that it was it enacted an arbitrary 2-mile buffer that had no scientific backing. We really felt that this should be a local zoning issue, and that DES already had siting rules in place that were very thorough and would take care of the processes necessary and the concerns necessary as related to water quality issues and things of that nature. So I know you have a lot of people to testify, and you're going to get a ton of information. So I'm going to stop there, but I wanted you to know that what the E&A committee position was and why we voted the way that we did, and hopefully that will help you to ask some thought-inspired questions as you go forward from the other folks that are going to testify. So thank you for your time.
Can you take a couple of questions if there are any?
I can.
Are there any questions from the committee? I do. You kind of surprised me here. The committee spoke and voted against this bill, and how did it pass the House? How did that transpire?
Sure. So the committee voted 10-9 to ITL. That was the committee recommendation. The bill was one of many that were on the last end of the calendar, and it was special ordered to come up on the House floor. And we had many folks that had left for the day feeling that we were done with the calendar, at least with all the ought to pass portions of it. And we weren't anticipating that the ITL portion was going to come up. This bill was 30 or 40 bills deep into the calendar. And so it was special ordered and came to the floor, and it suffered the fate of having the committee report overturned, and the ITL turned into an ought to pass with an amendment.
So is that because did people leave? I mean, were people just not interested or just tired out, or what's the story?
Obviously, I can't speak for others' motivations, but it is my understanding that many felt that the House session was going to be ended shortly thereafter, and this bill was so far down into the calendar they didn't believe it was ever going to see action.
So people left.
Yes.
Interesting. Questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you, Representative. I appreciate your testimony.
Thank you. Have fun.
Yeah. It's interesting.
The next person I have is Representative Suzanne Smith.
Representative, welcome. I think you have
Representative
to.
Smith, you should be able to unmute yourself. All right, I've requested her to unmute a couple of times. Why don't I move on to another representative, then we can come back to Representative Smith. The next representative I have is Representative Kaplan. Let me find. Representative Kaplan, you should be able to unmute.
Super.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, hi, Senators. Thanks for taking my testimony. This is Representative Tony Kaplan from Merrimack 6, the towns of Henniker and Bradford. I wanted to start off by saying that this bill, HB 177, is not a not in my backyard bill. It's not an example of spot zoning, in my opinion, because this is a bill that arose out of a set of circumstances that came about in the course of ordinary affairs where people said, hold on a second, this particular practice doesn't make sense not only here in Forest Lake, but it doesn't make sense anywhere in New Hampshire. There are 68 state parks across New Hampshire from north to south, and a 2-mile boundary around our state parks would leave still 10,000 times the land area for landfill developers to choose from to meet our projected garbage disposal needs in the coming decades. A 2-mile boundary around our state parks isn't arbitrary. On the contrary, a 2-mile buffer is a scientifically defensible distance to enable managers to detect groundwater leaks with enough time to carry out mitigation efforts, given that despite how well designed a landfill might be, we know that all landfill liners leak at some point. And given the speed and generally difficult to predict direction of groundwater flows, a 2-mile buffer makes absolute sense. We know that the Department of Environmental Services has been operating without a mandated solid waste plan since 2003 and is currently being sued in district court for issuing landfill permits without a plan. Chronic underfunding in the Department of Environmental Services has led even DES officials to publicly question the agency's capabilities. The process is troubled. People say we should just leave this to the process and let the DES process take its course, but the process is troubled. And shouldn't we design a system that takes the most extreme and unacceptable circumstances off the table? We shouldn't even be contemplating this practice of siting a landfill next to a state park. Tourism, as somebody mentioned, tourism is our second largest industry. It generates around $5 billion in revenues to the state and supports more than 70,000 jobs. State parks bring in over $500 million of those dollars every year. And these figures don't even count the economic activity generated by seasonal homeowners and their families in our state. Many of them have been here for generations, and many have bought houses around our state parks because they concluded years ago, and I believe rightfully so, that the state would not abdicate its fiduciary duties and protect its valued and identified assets as represented by our state parks. So I would urge the senators today to keep in mind what these two things represent. A landfill is where we put the end result of our consumption practices. It's where the garbage goes. And a state park is our publicly identified site of great natural beauty and value. And we should try to keep at least 2 miles between these things. So I would urge you to take this bill that came off the floor with a bipartisan ought to pass, aided by a groundswell of public support, and vote it forward. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Questions from the committee? Representative Kaplan, do you have a reference to the science that you had mentioned where we can look? Were there any reports of the science?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I can send you my testimony with references if you'd be interested in that.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And seeing no further questions, thank you very much. Cameron?
Okay, next I have Representative Andrew Bolden. Representative Bolden, you should be able to unmute.
Welcome, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, my name is Andrew Bolden. I represent Ward 5 in the city of Manchester, and I'm speaking in support of HB 177. I'm also the chairman of the Manchester House delegation, a delegation which voted overwhelmingly in support of HB 177. There's dozens of reasons why you should support this bill too, and I'm sure you'll hear about most of them today from other speakers, but I'm going to focus on 3 that I found particularly compelling. But first, very briefly, I want to say that I categorically reject the assertion that this bill was only passed in the House because of low attendance. This is the first time I've heard that, so I've scrambled in the past few minutes to look up the numbers. The House record reflects that 356 members voted on this bill, which is consistent with the number of members who voted on any other motion that day. So now I'll proceed with my comments. The first reason why I support this bill is that it's smart economic policy for New Hampshire to protect our natural resources. Tourism is a major economic driver, and our state parks are a major attractor of visitors to our state. There's a reason why when I go to White Lake State Park, more than half the cars in the parking lot have Massachusetts license plates. And White Lake isn't exactly close to our southern border. Those out-of-state residents are driving 2 or 3 hours to get here, and that's without traffic. If you've ever tried to drive north on a Friday afternoon in the summer, you know it can take a lot longer. And when you're stuck in all that traffic, you look around, what do you see? Massachusetts, Connecticut, Massachusetts. Sometimes it's even hard to find another New Hampshire license plate in the mix. Where are they all going? They're coming to visit our natural resources, our state parks, our mountains, our lakes, places we've been protecting for generations. Secondly, while there's only one state park with a landfill proposal currently, this bill is not exclusive. It protects all of our state parks from the negative economic and environmental consequences of landfills. It's a well-known fact that the EPA has stated that all landfills leak eventually. So if a landfill is placed close to a state park, it's not a question of if the state park will be negatively affected by the landfill. It is a question of when. And when it happens, we will be faced with the decision of whether to begin a costly cleanup process or just close the park to visitors entirely. And landfill remediation is not cheap. The Corcory landfill on the seacoast has cost tens of millions of dollars so far, and it's still not where it needs to be. And finally, New Hampshire is not a trailblazer on this topic, and this issue is not partisan. North Carolina has a 2-mile buffer around their state parks, which is the exact same thing we're proposing here with House Bill 177. They also have a 1-mile buffer around game land and a 5-mile buffer around national wildlife refuges. New Jersey has a 6.25-mile buffer zone around their national parks and wildlife areas, and Georgia has a 3.2-mile buffer around their historic parks. In addition, 8 other states have similar buffer zones protecting their parks or other natural resources and recreational areas. They are Delaware, Mississippi, Pennsylvania, South Carolina, Texas, Virginia, Washington, and Wisconsin. And these states aren't particularly known as having liberal environmental policies. That's because these states all realize the severe detrimental effects a landfill can have on a state park. Effects such as diminished public enjoyment and reduction in visitation due to viewscape, noise, and odor impacts, various harmful effects to native wildlife, from landfill scavengers through displacement, depredation of nesting sites and harassment, modification of hydrology patterns and water quality degradation resulting from potential failures and unintended releases, alteration of function and value of local wetland areas, and increased vehicular traffic from hundreds of tractor trailers per day filled to the brim with garbage. I assure you, I am not anti-landfill, and although we don't have any immediate shortage of landfill capacity, I realize that we're going to need another 2, maybe 3 landfills over the next 100 years in New Hampshire. That being said, I think we should make sure that they're placed in such a way to reduce the associated negative consequences to our state and its economy. Placing one just 190 feet from a state park is not how we reduce these negative consequences. It is how we guarantee them. And the last thing I want to mention is you may hear that this bill would reduce the amount of land available in New Hampshire for landfilling by about 9%. And my understanding is that is correct. That may sound like a lot, but numbers like that can be misleading if you don't understand the context. Currently, New Hampshire has 12,000 times more land area available for landfilling than we will need for the next 100 years. If we pass House Bill 177, then we would still have 11,000 times more land area than we need. There's virtually countless places where landfills could go in New Hampshire. Like I said earlier, there's dozens of reasons why we shouldn't put one near a state park, and there's absolutely no justification for doing so. So please vote this common sense bipartisan bill ought to pass to protect our unique natural resources and our tourism economy for future generations.
Thank you, Representative. Questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you.
The next representative I have is Representative Betty Gay. There you go.
Thank you very much for taking my testimony. I have extremely simple reasons. One is that I grew up next to Texas City, which has all kinds of chemical plants, which now extend all the way up to Houston. So I'm very aware of pollution and water, because that's all along the Houston waterway, which used to be where you could swim. Our church camp had to close because of the pollution. Landfills, even if you construct them with a liner, are going to leak someday. So there's no 100% protection to prevent that from ever happening. The idea of less than 200 feet being a buffer for something that leaks and smells, as well as attracts heavy vehicles. And I'm trying to think, the vision, that's one thing. Okay, you can put tall trees around it, but you can't stop what it smells like, and you can't stop what it does to the people who live nearby. And what's really concerning to me is the water. Our state, even though right now we're going through a drought, we're blessed with a lot of water and a lot of pathways of water underground, as well as what we see above ground. There is no way to block contamination that gets into the underground water. It's just too big. It's too big a project. It cannot be done. So and it's a whole lot easier to prevent it than it is to try to clean it up and block it once it's happened. So that's my really simple testimony that well, there was one other thing. We have hundreds of Superfund sites around the state that need to be cleaned up, where I'm assuming the owners either didn't know these trucks were dumping all kind of poisonous things, or their palms were greased and they didn't think about future damage. They were poor, here's some money. Okay, go to the lower East 40, I'll never see it. I have so much land, it won't bother me. So now we're left with hundreds of poisonous sites in the state. The last thing we need is another one right next to pristine water. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative, and thank you for your service. Questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you.
Next, I have Representative Peter Bigsby.
Peter, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for taking my testimony. For the record, I'm Representative Peter Bixby, ranking member of the House Environment and Agriculture Committee and resident of Dover, New Hampshire, representing parts of Dover and Somersworth. So the key aspect of this bill, I think that is most important, is that it's about protecting New Hampshire's tourism industry. And our state parks are magnets for tourism, and a lot of the businesses that depend on them are small family businesses that are essentially tailoring their business towards that tourism industry and taking very good care of our tourists from both in-state and out of state. One issue that may come up is the question of, if we pass this bill, will it diminish our capacity for our landfill capacity in the state? And estimates of there are sort of dire estimates that we're going to run out of landfill capacity in the next decade or so. And there are a couple of things that need to be paid attention to in terms of those estimates. One is that it's based on current permitted capacity, and the permits at existing landfills are, it is possible to increase those permits at existing landfills. Another thing it does is it assumes that we will be doing nothing to reduce or divert municipal solid waste and other typically landfilled types of waste. And that is something that in our recommendations in HB 413, the direction is to work on figuring out ways to reduce the amount of waste going into landfills. Some of the possibilities for that are, as Vermont has done, banning organics from landfills, and also banning unprocessed construction debris. And another aspect of this is disincentivizing getting the import of waste from out of state. We cannot ban it because of the Commerce Clause, but we can make it less attractive to for other states to send their waste to us. And the organic ban and the CD limitations would have some effect there. So there are things we can do to extend our landfill capacity by reducing the amount that is directed towards landfills. A couple of comments that came up earlier. Just one little clarification about the actual language of the bill. It says that there's no permitting of new landfills within 2 miles of a state park. So if there is, any existing landfill is, and an expansion of the existing landfill is exempted from that ban. Another thing that was mentioned was the issue of Department of Environmental Security Services rules, and that the rules might somehow trump our capacity as legislators to make restrictions on landfills. And it actually works the other way. We as legislators direct the departments to gear their rules to what we see as the important policies. So it is our choice as legislators to move the policy that we think is best going to defend the interests of New Hampshire. And just in terms of the how did it pass in the House, there were a couple dozen, I didn't look at the exact numbers on the roll calls, but I think it was about a couple dozen Republican legislators joined with the Democratic legislators to vote in favor of overturning the ITL recommendation and then voting the ought to pass with amendment. And with that, I will finish, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Representative, and thank you for speaking so eloquently and for your service. Questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you very much.
Okay, next I'm going to go back to Representative Suzanne Smith and see if she's able to unmute at this point. Representative Smith?
Hi there. Yes, thank you. I am able to unmute. Greetings, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Because of all the testimony we're hearing today and in favor of this bill, and I am strongly in favor of the bill, both because state parks are an economic driver, they're beautiful, and the risk of depleting their excitement and beauty with a landfill so close by with its seagulls, trash, and other things that could end up around the state park. And it, as has been stated, many all of our state parks would be affected by this bill, not just the one that is under consideration right now. As you may not know, the state parks has a license plate. People can purchase a state park, which allows them to enter any of our state parks. The state park, the head of state parks, Phil Bryce, has just recently sent out an email to members of the State Park Advisory Council, of which I am part of, that we've just passed the $1 million mark with how many people have purchased these license plates. And so that's just one indicator of how popular the state parks are. We have a lot of bills before us to try to cope with our solid waste situation. I know that this committee has voted on one, and we've got one in our committee also in the House. But I don't want to take up your time, let other people speak. I just want to say I please hope that you support this bill, and thank you for the work you're doing.
Thank you, Representative. Questions from the committee? Thank you for your service. And Cameron.
Next, we have Representative Megan Murray. Let me see here. It looks like Representative Murray is using an older version of Zoom, so I'll have to promote her to a panelist to allow her to participate.
Okay. Representative, welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me. Hi, my name is Megan Murray, State Representative for Hillsboro 22 Amherst. I'm testifying today in support of HB 177. I simply ask the senators to consider a parent perspective and support the necessity to protect our natural resources and protect tourism, but also protect the land so that outdoor organizations that are child and adult led as well can continue to utilize state parks like Forest Lake regularly. As well as ensuring tourism industry protection. Protecting this type of areas for generations to come is paramount to the future of New Hampshire. I also want to draw attention to the fact that landfilling is one of the least desirable disposal methods on the waste disposal hierarchy, and I can speak to that briefly as I served on the study committee HB 617 a few years ago. And with that, I just, again, want to ask for your support on HB 177. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative, and thank you for your service. Questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you.
Okay, and then the last representative that I have is Representative Maria Perez.
Representative Perez, welcome. Representative Perez, you probably want to unmute if you can. There we go.
Yep. Thank you so much for the opportunity to testify in support of HB 177. My name is Maria Perez. I'm a state representative for District 23 in Milford. I support this bill because our state parks bring revenue to our state. It's amazing how much that we can bring our families and relatives when they come in, not just out of state, but when they come in from another country, and then show them how beautiful our state is, and they can spend their money in our state. Not only that, but to be honest, starting this bill, I took the time and I visited a lot of state parks in our state. I went to Delton as well. I speak to some of the small business owners and how this bill would help them to continue with the tourist visitors in the area. But to be honest, it's not just one project. Our state parks in New Hampshire, they're so beautiful. And the things that like people enjoy when they come, like for example, my kids live in North Carolina right now, but they were born in New Hampshire, and the way they feel when they talk about New Hampshire and the beautiful state parks that we have, and then bringing even people from North Carolina to visit New Hampshire, it is grateful to see, you know, that they feel like proud to be from New Hampshire and be proud to show, you know, how beautiful New Hampshire is. And the other reason that I'm supporting this bill is because we need to protect our water. We have so many problems with water contamination, and I know that these particular project will contaminate the water in the area. And and it's a lot of things that, you know, that we need to consider when we're talking about landfills so close to state parks and recreational areas. And for that reason, I will ask the Senate to support this bill.
Thank you, Representative. We appreciate your testimony and your service. Questions from the committee? Seeing none. All right. Thank you very much.
Okay, and then we do have Representative Timothy Egan.
Representative Egan, welcome.
Thank you all for taking the time to hear me. Thank you for your, excuse me, sorry. Thank you for taking the time to hear me. I represent Grafton District 2, which is Sugar Hill, Franconia, Lisbon, Lyman, and Monroe. Franconia, the home of Franconia State Park. I serve on the Fish and Game Committee, and I serve on the New Hampshire Canada Trade Council. And there's been a variety of things that I won't repeat to move your committee hearing along today, but I will add one thing that was not mentioned. Recently, Governor Sununu and the BEA created the Office of Outdoor Recreation Industry Development, which I think displays the state's commitment to outdoor activity-based tourism as a key economic generator for New Hampshire. And this type of growing industry relies on our continued beauty of our mountains, forests, lakes, streams, and wildlife. And all of these aspects are housed in our historic state park system. So when people ask me, why do we need to have a buffer zone? Why would it even be a question to have a buffer zone around state parks? I answer it with, it's a silly question. Why shouldn't we have one? Why shouldn't we protect this historic state park system that creates $5.5 billion as of 2017, the New Hampshire Division of Travel and Tourism mentioned $5.5 billion of revenue, the second leading industry in our state. Why wouldn't we protect that? So I'm here to ask you to support House Bill 177. As a member of Fish and Game, I represent, as I like to say, hippies, hunters, and hikers, and all of them have expressed to me that pristine state parks for their whatever use should be maintained by the state. So I appreciate your time hearing me out today. And if there's any questions, I'm glad to take any.
Thank you, Representative, and thank you for your service. Questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, the next person I have is Karen Anderson.
Are there any people from the department that want to testify?
I believe Mike Wimsat is here.
Let's get Mike on first, please.
Yep. Okay, Mike, you should be able to unmute.
Yes, good afternoon, Mr. Chairman.
Welcome, Mike.
Yes, for the record, my name is Mike Wimsat. I serve as director of the Waste Management Division for the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. The department is not taking a position on this bill. We have, as requested, provided a letter that provides some background information about how the agency processes application for permits. And the content of that letter and the issues that we cover in the letter are really based on the concerns that were raised during the House Environment and Agriculture Committee's hearing. So that letter has been placed into, I'd like to have it placed into testimony as a reference item for the committee members. And I don't have any testimony to provide, but would be happy to field any questions.
Okay, questions from the committee? Senator Waters and then Senator Gray.
Go ahead, Senator Gray.
Senator Gray.
I was just going to ask that he summarize the content of the letter a little more so that the people that are zooming in would have better access to that information. Thank you.
Sure, thank you, Senator. I'd be happy to do that. So when we listened to the hearing at the House Environment and Agriculture Committee, we heard a lot of concerns regarding some of the same concerns you've heard today regarding particular, and this is not to diminish them, but the conditions that are termed nuisance conditions. So that would be things like odor, litter, vectors like birds or vermin, noise, and impacts on offsite properties. So what we provide in the letter is a summary of the requirements of the rules and the conditions that we typically put in solid waste landfill permits to address those particular nuisance conditions. And those issues, or those provisions are many. They include requirements to apply daily and intermediate cover over waste, so that waste that is deposited in the landfill during its operation is not left uncovered for an extended period of time. And that helps to address issues of odor and vectors. Also, limiting exposed waste during filling operations to the smallest area practicable. So that means basically what's termed the working face of the landfill. As you are operating a landfill and accepting shipments of waste, there's an expectation that you will operate the area where waste is actively being disposed each day as a minimum area, so you have the minimum amount of waste exposed at any given time. Also, we expect that litter fences and also just policing the surrounding areas for wind-blown litter is a way to manage litter from being blown off of the site. Installing and operating a landfill gas collection and control system. This is really the primary and most important means of controlling odors from landfills, because the odors from landfills certainly include waste that's actively being tipped and disposed of on a given day, particularly if that's particularly odorous. But the real, odor impacts tend to be from landfill gas. So as the waste has been deposited and begins to decompose, it generates a variety of landfill gases, some of which have a very high amount of odor. And so what we require is that an engineered gas collection and control system be designed and installed both during operation and then after closure of the landfill, so that basically there are pipes and headers that collect landfill gas under vacuum, and then that gas can be conveyed to a flare to burn it off so that the odors aren't detected, or in some cases, in many cases, sent to an engine where it's burned for its energy recovery to generate power to sell back to the electric grid. And that's a common thing at some of our larger landfills. Also conducting periodic landfill cover integrity checks and surface emission monitoring. So we do require that the cover on a landfill, both in the immediate working area, but also across the entire landfill, be checked to make sure that it is adequate, that it hasn't eroded away. And then we also have required the operators of the landfill, and this is also done as a compliance monitoring technique by staff in our air resources division, where they take detecting devices that can detect landfill gas, and they do surface emission monitoring over the surface of the landfill. And those are requirements that are both in the rules and in the permit, in provisions in the permits that we issue. Also rejecting odorous waste. So in some cases, there may just be waste that creates such odor problems that we expect, if that happens continuously, we would expect the landfill operator to reject those wastes. That's a means of managing odors, or requiring that those wastes be treated prior to arrival at the facility. And a recent example is that in a recent permit, we required that any wastewater treatment sludges that come to the facility be treated before being shipped to the facility to reduce odors and to neutralize the odors that they produce. Also, it's common to limit, and the rules limit the operations of the facility between 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. so that you don't have operations happening that would create noise or generate odors in the overnight hours. Also, with respect to noise, we've had provisions in some of our permits to require the use of what's called a static alarm on equipment. So if you everybody's heard a piece of heavy equipment backing up and that loud beeping alarm that you can hear a long distance away. So in some cases where that has posed a problem for neighbors, we have requested that static alarms on equipment, at least that equipment that is operated routinely at the facilities, such as compactors and other facility-owned trucks, to be equipped with the static alarm, which still provides the level of safety, but the sound doesn't travel nearly as far. And then Also for birds, that in some cases are required to implement a bird depredation program where they would actually control the birds that maybe if a facility is having trouble with a high number of birds, to implement a variety of techniques to get rid of the birds. So the second thing that, so that's kind of a rundown of the list that we provided in the letter of provisions for addressing those nuisance conditions. There was also, as you've heard this morning or this afternoon, and also in the E&A committee, witnesses expressing concerns about the potential for contamination of groundwater and surface water from landfill operations and management of leachate. And we do have a paragraph in the letter which describes that any proposed landfill must undergo very rigorous hydrologic and hydrogeological evaluations to ensure that the proposed facility meets our siting criteria with respect to groundwater and surface water, and also to ensure that the conditions are well understood and that the fate and transport of any potential contamination could be predicted. The rules require that landfills be designed and constructed in New Hampshire with a double synthetic liner system. So the primary liner is designed to collect any leachate, that's the liquid that percolates down through the landfill waste from precipitation and any moisture that's in the waste that's received. And so it's a normal part of any landfill operation. There will be leachate generated. And the primary liner is designed to have leachate collected on the liner and then have a leachate collection system that's designed to get that leachate off the liner as promptly as possible. Two engineered leachate collection systems through pipes and tanks. And then those tanks are periodically pumped off and the leachate is generally shipped to a wastewater treatment facility for treatment. And then the purpose of the secondary liner is to capture it in the event of any releases from the cap or the primary liner. That secondary liner is designed to capture any of those releases. And then that leachate is similarly collected for offsite disposal and treatment. If a release is detected, under normal conditions, a landfill is required to do groundwater monitoring and they're required to have a groundwater release detection permit, which requires the permittee to monitor groundwater quality on a periodic basis. And then if a release is detected, that's the purpose of that monitoring, then appropriate actions are required to identify and remedy the source of the release. And then basically monitoring is stepped up. And if there's a determination that there is a release, then remedial actions are required. And all of that is designed to protect groundwater and surface waters near the landfill. So the third thing that our letter does is basically just to explain what's termed the public benefit requirement. So RSA 149M, the statute, the Solid Waste Act in New Hampshire, requires that anytime DES reviews a permit application for a solid waste facility, particularly a landfill, it must determine in order to approve that application that the proposed solid waste facility provides a substantial public benefit. And that public benefit is defined in the statute as basically meeting three criteria. And in order to find that there is a public benefit, that the facility provides a public benefit, the agency must find that all three of those criteria are satisfied. And in short, I'm paraphrasing a bit here, the first one is the short and long-term, that we have to consider these criteria. The first one is the short and long-term need for a facility of the proposed type, size, and location to provide capacity to accommodate solid waste generated within the state. The second one is the ability of the proposed facility to assist the state in achieving the implementation of the hierarchy and goals, and that the hierarchy is provided for and is identified in the statute, and goals both in the statute but also in any solid waste plans that the agency may prepare or that are submitted by districts to the agency. And then the third one is the ability of the proposed facility to assist in achieving the goals of the state solid waste management plan and one or more solid waste plans. I apologize, I kind of covered that in the earlier one. But basically, so those are the three criteria that an applicant for a new landfill or an expansion of landfill needs to make a showing in their application that they meet those three criteria. And the agency must review that and make that determination and concur that the facility meets those criteria in order to show that the facility would provide a substantial public benefit. So that's part of the criteria for reviewing an application. And that's a maybe not so brief summary of our letter.
Senator Gray.
Yes, an additional question. Certainly, yeah, because I represent Rochester and actually live in Rochester, and the Turnkey landfill is here. I asked for the quarterly report for the first quarter of this year and found that there was only one complaint on there that had to do with noise of construction. They're made a new road down there. Is that unusual for a modern landfill that's following the compliance for your agency?
So I don't know what exactly the record was in the last quarter for the Turnkey facility. I would say that would be unusual. I would say typically we receive more noise and odor complaints than that in the quarter. And, well, I should say those, not all of those would be received by the agency. In many cases, what our permits require is that in the first instance, the facility have a means and educate nearby residents and citizens how to file a complaint directly with them. Because in our experience, the best way to address noise and odor complaints is for the operators of the facility to learn about the complaint in real time so that they can actually do something about it. So it's actually more efficient and effective for folks who file complaints to contact the facility directly in real time than it is to file a complaint with DES.
Just to clear up the testimony, I actually went to the city who gets the report right from Waste Management on a quarterly basis. So there was just that one. Thank you for your testimony.
Other questions? Senator Waters.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mike, for clarifying a lot of issues. And obviously, we're all very concerned about groundwater, and lots of problems that we understand are out there. So, wherever a facility is sited, whether it's close to State Park or more than 2 miles away, that DES is going to be reviewing any application pretty closely about potential effects on wetlands, groundwater, and so forth. Isn't that the kind of permitting process that requires you to do that?
That is correct. Typically, any new facility or an expansion of facility, to the extent that wetlands are impacted, there's required to get a wetlands permit in order to also be eligible for a solid waste permit. And then, of course, a solid waste permit is required as well. And as part of that, we would review the applicable rules related to setbacks from water features and ensuring that the siting criteria are met with respect to groundwater and surface cost protection.
Like I have.
Can I follow up, Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
Yeah. And then, Mike, we've done a lot of work over the last couple of years on the planning, and we've got House Bill 315 and Senate Bill 146 kind of being grafted onto that now to try to get at the study committee and then the 10-year plan for solid waste management. And we really have to find a way to source reduction, all kinds of other things that are in those bills. And without getting into the lawsuits or anything, I'm just not. I would imagine that you can't refuse to consider a proposal that comes before you at this point during the process of developing that 10-year plan. Would that be correct?
So if I understand your question correctly, the agency has a very clearly defined role, and that is that we are the permitting authority for solid waste facilities. And in fact, the statute directly says that DES shall administer the solid waste management program through a permit system. So anybody is eligible to apply for a permit for a facility. And our job is really very clinical. We look at that and we review it against all of the criteria in the law and in the rules. And we make a determination about whether that facility application can meet all of those requirements.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions I'd like to, I noticed that Representative Bixby brought up banning organic and construction debris. And it just draws my attention to potential of recycling. Are we recycling in this state at all?
Oh, sure. So recycling has been going on for decades in New Hampshire as well as across the country. I think a lot of people have the impression, and it is, depending on how they interpret it, it's partly true, that recycling has been in decline in recent years. And there's a very specific reason for that. And I think at some level, it's because we got very global for a while, to a point where a significant percentage of the whole country's recyclables were being shipped to China and some other countries as well, but primarily China. China was going through a massive growth period where they were desperate for raw materials, and they were willing to take recyclables because they were mining those recyclables for raw materials. But after doing that for many years, they sort of determined that they were becoming the delivery place for the world's garbage. And what was happening was that a lot of single stream recycling, where most of us are familiar with that, we put paper and cans and metal and plastic all in the same bin, and it gets carried away as a single stream recycling. What they were finding is that even after the country's materials recovery facilities, what we call MRFs for short. This is a place where you bring those single stream and they get separated out into the various component parts. Even after that process was done, the levels of what they would call contamination, which just means if I've got a bale of what's supposed to be HDPE #1 plastic, anything in it that's not HDPE #1 plastic is considered contamination to a recycler. So what they were finding is what they were getting had higher levels of contamination, such that it didn't make it that valuable to them. So they basically initially implemented something called a green fence, where they said, well, we're gonna look at this a little more closely, and we're gonna set higher standards, but we'll still take material. And then they put up what they called the national sword, which is a strange name, but basically they're just saying, unless you meet this particular contamination percentage and it's low enough, we will not take your material. And so what happened was the whole nation's recyclables that we were typically sending to China didn't meet that standard. So suddenly it was like a door got slammed, and we had all these materials that had, normally had an outlet for years, that no longer had an outlet. And as a result of being able to do that for so many years, the capacity to manage recyclables and reuse recyclables in the United States was diminished. So I like to describe it, and people who are a lot smarter than me on this describe it as a national reset, where the country is going through a reset, reevaluating how it collects and processes recyclables. And that's going to take some time. And unfortunately, we're still suffering from it, but during its peak, we're rebounding a little bit, but during its peak, commodities prices for these recyclables dropped precipitously. And yet, so the requirement to try to operate these MRFs as effectively as possible to reduce contamination was very expensive. So to put it in perspective, some people would put an average tipping fee around $80 to $85, $90 a ton at a landfill for a ton of trash. A materials recovery facility, which for a while was competitive with that at least, or maybe even cheaper, during this national sword policy implementation, those MRFs were charging up to $140 a ton on contract. So a community looking at their options would say, well, I can spend $140 to recycle this, or I can send it to a landfill for $85. Which am I going to do? And of course, community leaders are faced with very difficult decisions economically. So as a result, we did see a number of communities decide to just dispose of their recyclables. Most of them had worked so long and so hard to keep recycling as part of their paradigm that they just paid the money and they continued doing it. We're going through a reset now. I think it'll get better, but we're not there yet. And so for a lot of communities that have single stream recycling, this continues to be an economic problem.
So if I may interrupt real quick, I know that Representative Bixby brought up a capacity too. So that goes into the capacity situation where if we're not recycling, it's going into our landfills, and our landfills are are getting full. And what is our capacity situation at this point?
So with regard to capacity, so we have three major commercial landfills currently operating in New Hampshire. There are a few municipal landfills that do some commercial operation, but they're limited service areas. So I'm not going to talk about those. I'll just, the relevance to the statewide system is really these three landfills. The biggest one Senator Gray made reference to, and that's the Turnkey landfill in Rochester, operated by Waste Management Incorporated. That one currently has a permit that was recently, or within the last couple of years, was approved for an expansion. And that will operate through, is expected and required to operate through 2034. The second, and I would note, just, this is not passing judgment on this by any means, but I think it's relevant to your question. That facility is expected to have some additional land where it could propose to expand in the future, but that's not something that is currently, that's nothing that's before the department at this time. The second one is the Mount Carbury landfill in Success, New Hampshire, which is a small town adjacent to Berlin. And that is operated by the Androscoggin Valley Regional Refuse Disposal District. And that is, although it's owned by a quasi-public, or really a public entity, it is also operated commercially. So it does take trash from an unlimited service area. It is currently permitted to operate through 2025. And I believe has an application before us, or one that may be expected that would expand it. So that also is a facility that has land that could be looked at for expansions in the future. And then the third one is the North Country Environmental Services landfill in Bethlehem. That one is currently permitted to operate through 2026. It does have land adjacent to it that theoretically could be used to expand it. However, I believe a zoning change would be required in that case in order for it to be able to expand.
So the people that are watching this hearing right now, it was news to me. Hello? The people that are watching this hearing right now, it was news to me in one of the previous hearings to find out that Massachusetts and other states actually bring in their garbage into New Hampshire. Is that true?
That is absolutely correct, yes.
And so do we do the same? Do we send our trash down to them?
To a much lesser degree. So basically the issue that's important to understand with respect to solid waste disposal is that it's considered subject to the Interstate Commerce Clause of the US Constitution. So the agency or the state can't enact something that unfairly discriminates against interstate commerce of solid waste or importation of trash to New Hampshire. So while any facility that seeks a permit in New Hampshire does have to demonstrate that it will provide a public benefit to the people of the state by providing, in part by providing capacity for the state's waste, that doesn't preclude a facility from also seeking to operate at a much greater quantity or throughput, thereby allowing out-of-state waste importation. So the Turnkey landfill example, last year, I think it was around 50-50, where about 50% of the waste landfill there was imported from out of state. I believe the NCES landfill was on the order of 25% last year. And then Mount Carbury, I'm not going to quote, it was in that range, but I remember, so I'm not going to give you a number.
So if the landfills up north run out of capacity in the next 5 or 10 years or so, what do they do with their garbage?
Well, so that's I guess the best way to answer that question is that if we assume as an assumption that no landfills get cited and we fill up the landfills and there's no landfills in the state, as an argument's sake, and I'm not saying we're at risk of that, but let's say that happened. What a lot of states are doing who have taken a much more aggressive stance on development of landfills is they are shipping their waste out of state. So there are a number of states, including New York, Ohio, Pennsylvania, where very large landfills have been constructed. And there are, in southern New England or even, in the Northeast, states like New York and Connecticut are actually not only trucking trash to those out-of-state landfills, but they're actually sending it via train.
Wow. So we could beef up our our recycling in the state if we wanted to reduce our landfill intake, I would assume.
Certainly, it's clear from the statute that there's a desire on the part of the legislature to maximize diversion from landfilling or any other and disposal and maximize recycling as much as possible. That is in large part right now, market-based because of these problems we're having with the cost of processing recyclables. But certainly making recycling easier and less expensive will almost certainly have reduced the amount of waste from New Hampshire that is disposed of in our landfills.
Representative Timothy Egan mentioned that it's a $5.5 billion industry, talking about tourism. Has there been an economic impact as how it will affect tourism if this landfill or if landfills are made? I mean, has there been a study saying that this will impact our economic benefit from our wildlife? Or do you deal
I'm
with that?
sorry, could you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, I'm gonna try that again. Representative Egan brought up the fact that the tourism in New Hampshire is about $5.5 billion. By adding another landfill, will that or allow a couple more landfills to be built, do you think that'll have an impact on our tourism?
I really don't know. I'm not aware of any study that's looked at that, and I really don't know the answer to that.
All right, any more questions from the committee? Can you stick around in case we think of some more later on?
I have blocked off the whole afternoon.
We really appreciate that. Thank you very much. Next, Cameron.
So actually on my list, I had missed Representative Dennis Thompson.
Representative, welcome.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and committee members. Thank you for allowing me to testify. I'm a co-sponsor, a Republican and a co-sponsor of this bill. I represent District 1 up in Coos County, an area who depends primarily on tourism for our well-being. As you all know, in the last year with the pandemic, our area has suffered greatly, as have many other areas of the state. Anything that is going to affect that type of tourist dollar coming to our area, and 168-acre landfill within sight of state roads would certainly do that, in my opinion. One of the things that Mr. Wimsatt just testified to was in the 3 criteria he listed, the number one was the need for a place to dispose of New Hampshire trash. The Casella organization in their application, I believe, and I'm not quoting it, I believe stated that if the Dalton landfill were to be approved, 49.1% of the trash that would go into it would come from out of state. If we're going to protect the state of New Hampshire's parks, and I see this and have seen this from the day I read the LSR, which was not very descriptive, as a state park bill. This is not specifically a landfill bill. If someone had proposed 168-acre junkyard, 168-acre hazardous waste disposal area, there'd be a tremendous uproar from everyone, including the local taxpayers, because they wouldn't be offered the type of reward they've been offered in this particular instance. I also understand, and I hope I'm correct on this, that the town of Dalton has already passed zoning to prohibit this landfill. Again, we keep getting back to the landfills, and the landfills, in my opinion, are not the important part of this bill. The important part of this bill is the protection of New Hampshire's 68 state parks, our waterways, our wildlife, and more importantly than all of those things probably, and it's unfortunate that it is the $5.5 billion a year that tourism in tourism that comes to this state. We need to continue to protect the environment in New Hampshire. We're a small state, and I understand the Commerce Clause and the requirement that we take out of state trash. I think that there must be a way to limit that amount so that we can extend the life of our landfills and again, extend the life of our state parks. It's inevitable that landfills are going to be built within 5 miles of a state park, say, but we had to start somewhere, and hopefully this will give us some time to come up with recycling, logical recycling solutions, composting solutions, and waste diversion and other ways to extend the life of these landfills that we currently have, and hopefully resolve this issue somewhat by doing those things. I thank you again for your time. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them to the extent that I can.
Thank you, Representative, and we appreciate your service. Questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much. Cameron?
Okay, next I have Joseph Fusco. Joseph, you should be able to unmute.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, for giving me the time to share our position with you today. I am Joseph Fusco, a Vice President of Casella Waste Systems. We are a critical part of how society manages the life cycle of our natural and material resources, from recycling to renewal to disposal. We believe that we have a social responsibility to carefully and reasonably think about, invest in, and develop the vital infrastructure, including landfills, that makes modern life possible. We believe it is vital to develop this infrastructure under a rigorous policy and regulatory framework that prioritizes science and fact-based examination of many critical factors, including technology, safety, hydrogeology, and uncompromising engineering, construction, and operating standards. First and foremost, we believe this bill is unnecessary from a regulatory, permitting, and public policy standpoint. Any technical, scientific, environmental concerns or standards for the siting of a landfill on any square inch of New Hampshire land is covered and addressed under a very sophisticated and comprehensive regulatory and permitting regimen. This regimen reviews hundreds of criteria and requires the extensive scientific review of multiple environmental and quality of life impacts. In fact, the protections that proponents of this bill seek are covered by New Hampshire's regulatory and permitting standards and processes. The fears proponents seek to soothe with this bill are superseded by an existing public policy process containing an immense amount of diligence on every aspect of the appropriate siting, permitting, construction, operation, closure, and post-closure monitoring of New Hampshire's landfills. The simplest argument against this bill is that it is unnecessary. It is not a scientific, fact-based approach to policymaking around the management of New Hampshire's environmental infrastructure. And despite attempts to amend it or spin it otherwise, it is the inconsistent, hypocritical targeting of a specific industry, a specific company, and a specific project. It also puts New Hampshire's waste disposal infrastructure at risk. Based on the DES's own research, after waste diversion—
I'm sorry to interrupt, Senator Avard, that's been 2.5 minutes.
Okay, we did put a time limit, but I'll let this go further, seeing how that we didn't refresh. So further on, it'll be a 2.5 minute, and I'll just remind everybody, after department heads and representatives get to speak, there'll be a limit of 2.5 minutes, but I'll let you go further because I didn't remind you, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah.
According to, based on the DES's own research, there is indicated a capacity shortfall between 9 million and 23 million tons over the next 2 decades. This legislation is not how you manage a vital public infrastructure. We urge the committee to oppose it. In addition to me, you will hear from other members of the Casella team with expertise in siting and permitting. I encourage you to use these folks as a resource for your more technical permitting and regulatory process questions. And I thank you today.
Thank you very much, Joseph. Questions from the committee? I have one. What about the whole thing of greenhouse gases? Can you comment a little bit about that and how that the gases that come from these landfills are treated?
Sure, I'll give you a brief overview. That's a great question. I asked some of our technical people who are on your witness list today. But the general approach to current modern landfill management means the harvesting of these landfill gases, primarily methane, so that they do not escape into the atmosphere where they are a potent greenhouse gas. That methane is then cleaned and engineered and then used as a fuel to produce electricity. In some cases, landfills of a certain size can produce up to 5 or 6 megawatts of electricity.
So if Massachusetts sends up some of their trash up this way and it creates a greenhouse, do you know how much gases, do you know how much we'll be able to reduce that through the new technologies in the landfills?
I do not know that specific answer myself, Mr. Chairman. I would ask, I believe Sam Nicolai is our engineer who's on your witness list later today.
All right, so I think that's what I wanted to find. Okay, so questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, I have Samuel Nicolai.
Welcome, Samuel.
Good afternoon. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Great. My name is Sam Nicolai. I'm Vice President of Engineering and Compliance for Casella. I'm a licensed professional engineer in the state of New Hampshire and have more than 25 years of environmental and engineering experience. I manage our team of engineers and staff who have responsibility for our permits, construction, and facility compliance. As you're aware, this bill proposes to restrict the location of new landfills in New Hampshire by establishing a new setback of 2 miles or 10,560 feet. The existing New Hampshire rules contain various existing criteria which landfills must comply with, including 200 feet from surface water, 500 feet from an occupied residence, and 1,000 feet from a drinking water intake. These criteria work hand in hand with the operational and engineering requirements for a facility. For example, the monitoring systems, the design of access, and the appearance of the facility are designed knowing that there can be surface water at 200 feet away or a home at 500 feet away. So if 500 feet away from a home is the appropriate distance, why would it make sense to establish a setback for state parks that's 20 times that amount? The answer is, of course, there's no technical basis for this type of setback. It's just an attempt to go around existing rules and the authority of the DES. Instead of evaluating a facility on its own merits, the bill arbitrarily picks a restriction to ban one proposed project. The idea that this is not spot zoning is false. The sponsor of the bill has testified in the House and here that the purpose of the bill was to oppose the Dalton project. What are the environmental protections that you get from a 2-mile setback for state parks that aren't also appropriate for people's homes and drinking water? Again, there are none. The bill excludes existing landfills from this criteria, but it's informative to take a quick look at how it would apply. The Mount Carbury landfill is located within a mile of the Appalachian Trail, and of course, which has significant level of day-to-day foot traffic. Almost all of the city of Berlin is within 2 miles, which is more than 10,000 people. The Lebanon solid waste facility is within 2 miles of all of West Lebanon and a southern portion of White River Junction. The Four Hills landfill is within 2 miles of the city of Nashua. The North Country landfill is within 2 miles of the White Mountain National Forest. Obviously, in New Hampshire and elsewhere, landfills can be operated effectively in concert with the surrounding community.
Sorry to interrupt, Senator Avard, that's been 2.5 minutes.
Okay, questions from the committee? I have one with regards to these targeting and spot zoning. You feel that is exactly what this bill is trying to do, is to make sure that your company can't build a particular project?
We believe it's clear that the sponsors of the bill have testified that that's the case. And the fact that it's only state parks, not local, not federal, not conservation areas, not historic areas, only state parks, makes it clear that the purpose of the bill is spot zoning.
A number of people were concerned about the contamination of water. You know that that's a really big issue here in New Hampshire. A lot of people are very concerned about PFAS and all these other things. Can you assure them that this bill doesn't or does protect one or the other? Does it protect our water system as opposed to not protecting it?
So I think that's a valuable question. As Director Wimsatt testified, each facility has to be evaluated for its own impacts to groundwater. And setting an arbitrary distance from state park does not provide any actual environmental protection. The reality is the park and the lake are in a different watershed than the landfill itself. And so the project should be evaluated based on what's really happening from a hydro standpoint, not simply selecting a number on a map and then claiming that it will provide some level of environmental protection. If it's good enough for the homes and the drinking water supplies, then the state park should be protected as well.
The previous speakers spoke of zoning and that they put in a zoning ordinance. I can't verify one way or the other, but has there been a zoning ordinance which would restrict a landfill from being put there up in the Dalton area?
The Dalton did pass a temporary zoning. Obviously, the facility would need to meet all of the requirements of the local town that apply to the facility. We're working very closely with the support that we have within the town, and we expect that the facility would be fully approved as part of the permitting process.
With regards to recycling, do you have recycling available for the local municipalities?
So I'd love to defer that question to Bob Capadonna, who is the manager of our recycling programs and who will be on a little later with testimony.
All right. Any further questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Okay, next I have Bob Capadonna.
Welcome, Bob.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'd like to just go quickly through my testimony, but I'd also like to touch upon the national sword and recycling in general, as was discussed earlier. But quickly, just way of background, Casella Regional Solid Waste Resource Management Company, serving more than 50,000 households and 5,500 businesses across 150 towns and cities in New Hampshire. As Vice President of Resource Solution, I am responsible for all strategy and operations within the company that helps us reduce, reuse, and recycle more than 1 million tons. And by way of our sustainability report, our goal is to double that in 2030. Since the previously mentioned National Sword Initiative, the ban of certain recyclable materials by China, domestic infrastructure recycling has been built over the past year, and we've seen commodity markets begin to rebound over the last 6 months. One of the unintended consequences of HB 177 is to have a negative impact on the advancements of these efforts of recycling in New Hampshire. Within the United States, 80% of curbside recycling programs are single stream recycling, which previously mentioned all recyclables in one bin. And the state of New Hampshire is one of only 2 states nationwide without a traditional state-of-the-art MRF, the other state being Mississippi. Even without the critical infrastructure that we think it needs to be in place, last year we diverted more than 40,000 tons of of New Hampshire's waste from landfills and incinerators to our recycling and organics program. We are currently collecting 30,000 tons of recyclable from the state annually and transporting them for processing in our MRFs in Auburn and Boston, Massachusetts. While these facilities have the capacity, it does pose a challenge when it comes to transportation costs. We are seeing New Hampshire municipalities abandon their recycling programs at alarming rates due to these costs, which are in the six figures in many instances, and could be controlled by a better investment in local processing infrastructure here in New Hampshire. However, to maximize environmental and economic outcomes associated with recycling, an integrated system that includes modern landfill options is needed. Our unique partnership with Goodwill Northern New England will allow us to collect textiles and other resaleable goods at this proposed facility, creating more opportunity that will further New Hampshire's waste reduction goals.
Interrupt, Senator Avard, that's been 2.5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Questions from the committee? Senator Waters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And in a way, aside from whatever happens up in Dalton, the MRF issue has been one that's been before us for several years now, and trying to find a way to get one built in the state. Had the bill last year to essentially charge a surcharge on the out-of-state trash that could go towards that. So is your sense that Casella is committed to moving forward on enhancing recycling and potentially building a MRF, just regardless of what happens with Dalton, or what's your sense of that?
And I'm sorry, Senator, you broke up there a little bit. Could you just the last question of that line, please?
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. So, given Casella's commitment to recycling and diversion, is Casella likely to go ahead with a MRF regardless of what happens in Dalton?
Well, Mr. Senator, we believe there's a comprehensive program that's needed here. This is not just a MRF by itself, but the comprehensive program with regards to extracting recyclables in a landfill. We do believe 20 to 25% of MSW, municipal solid waste that lands in a landfill, can be extracted from a MRF standpoint, a material recovery facility standpoint. So we do believe it is a comprehensive program.
Thank you.
And may, Mr. Senator, may I be able to just comment on the updates on National Sword if that?
I was going to ask you that anyway, but before you get to the National Sword, you had mentioned that municipalities are spending six figures just on their recycling or shipping it out, and then as a direct result, they're just instead of spending that money, they're putting it into the landfills.
You have both, right? The majority of the materials are being exported to Massachusetts. Again, we have 30,000 tons that are being transported out of New Hampshire to our Boston and Auburn MRFs. And there is an additional cost of that. Our costs in the measurement of the industry is a per ton. There is hundreds of thousands of dollars from exporting recyclables to Massachusetts, which could be eliminated if we had a state-of-the-art MRF in one of the southern tiers of New Hampshire, being Manchester or Hooksett. But absolutely, those costs, if eliminated, could in today's tip fee well below landfill tip fees, right? So it'd be more economical, reliant, and more economical sense with regards to municipalities from a savings standpoint to continue on with their recycling programs.
So other towns could ship it if you made one of these recycling plants. It's called a MRF. Is that
Material Recovery Facility? That is the acronym for a MRF.
So you put it in central New Hampshire, like not central, but southern New Hampshire, and the rest of the towns could ship there instead of to Massachusetts.
We would encourage that. We would encourage that. So, I mean, there's 30,000 tons. We know that 40,000 tons has been exported out of New Hampshire. That is the perfect size at 30 to 40,000 tons per year that could substantiate a MRF.
Does that lower our carbon footprint as far as in the transportation?
It absolutely does. Absolutely does.
Do you have any scientific data on that?
We could get you that. There was a study done by DSM Environmental that proves this out, that a landfill in a material recovery facility reduces greenhouse gas emissions by more than 29,000, the equivalent of 6,200 cars each year.
So a lot of people are really concerned about the water. And I for one am one as well. And we're always talking about PFAS and stuff. It's becoming a real hot issue, and we want to make sure that no leakage and all that type of thing. Can you talk a little bit about that?
No doubt. I mean, the water in PFAS is measured in each state by billionth. It's simple testing, and I can tell you that any of our organics facility from a composting standpoint are being tested daily and weekly, monthly, and we would do the same at the landfill and even at any organic site.
So Representative Bixby did talk about composting. Does composting occur in a? I'm very ignorant on this topic as far as.
That's okay. That's okay. Composting is not done at a MRF level. Composting is done at a separate organics facility of processing of biosolids and using composting in farmland and as such.
Would construction debris go to a MRF?
No, it would not.
Okay. Question
Those are separate, they're called C&D facilities and processing. Those are separate facilities. The MRF itself is a traditional recycling operation that handles traditional recyclables from cardboard to metals to plastics and glass.
Do you have a guess as to what, if we built a MRF in New Hampshire, what it would save the taxpayers?
I can tell you with regards to, 45 to 60 well-paid jobs, probably an influx of about $10 million to the state's economy, just from a job standpoint. And then you have the savings of costs of exporting the recyclables.
Further questions from the committee? None. Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
Okay, the next person I have is Charles Cressetti.
Welcome, Charles.
Believe he goes by Chip.
Chip.
Yes.
Welcome, Chip. How are you?
Great. Good afternoon, Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Chip Cressetti, and I'm one of the founders of Sanborn Head and Associates. We're an engineering and geosciences firm headquartered in Concord, New Hampshire, and we've been providing environmental and engineering services to public and private sector solid waste clients in New Hampshire since our founding in 1993. Granite State Landfill, or GSL, hired Sanborn Head to characterize their site. And based upon our site characterization work, we've determined that the site meets the criteria contained in the state of New Hampshire geologic siting limitations for landfills. And if a landfill is constructed at the site, the groundwater will be routinely monitored with a release detection permit issued pursuant to DES. We understand the proponents of HB 177 argue that a landfill near Forest Lake in Dalton could negatively impact the water quality of the lake. After evaluating the surface water and groundwater conditions at the site, we conclude this concern is unfounded. With regard to surface water flow at the proposed GSL facility, GSL landfill footprint lies within the eastern portion of the Alder and Hatch Brook watershed, and a natural ridgeline forms a surface water divide between the proposed GSL facility and Forest Lake, with water to the east flowing easterly toward Forest Lake, and surface water to the west flowing westerly away from the lake and towards the GSL site. Gravity prevents surface water from traveling uphill or otherwise crossing this ridgeline, and the surface water cannot move over the divide from the proposed GSL facility to Forest Lake. Similarly, with regard to groundwater flow, groundwater elevation measurements at the site indicate the presence of a groundwater divide along and beneath the ridgeline that separates the surface water drainage flowing to the east and flowing to the west. The subsurface groundwater divide results in a similar flow pattern in groundwater. East of the divide, the groundwater flows towards Forest Lake. West of the divide, the groundwater flows away from the lake. Because groundwater flow at GSL site is away from Forest Lake, any potential impacts that might occur to groundwater from the landfill will not reach Forest Lake. Thank you for the opportunity to appear here today, and I'm open for any questions.
Thank you, Chip. I appreciate that. Questions from the committee? None at this time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, the next person I have is John Swan. John, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Yep.
Welcome, John.
Thank you, Senators. My name is John Swan. I live in Dalton, New Hampshire, and I am the founder of Save Forest Lake. And I apologize, my head is about to explode after hearing some of this testimony, but I'm going to stick to my points. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak in support of House Bill 177 to protect all of our wonderful New Hampshire state parks from the threats and nuisances posed by siting an abutting garbage landfill development next door. Today, Senators, you have the opportunity to do something good, to reach out across the aisle as they did in the House, work together in bipartisan fashion, and do something good for the state of New Hampshire. I've got a question for you. Would you vote to site a New Hampshire state park next to a garbage landfill? Of course not. Obvious reasons. So why on earth would you support siting a landfill next to any of our New Hampshire state parks. Let's not sugarcoat it. We're talking about a garbage landfill next to a vital component to our state economy. It's the second largest industry, tourism. So who on earth would think that siting a landfill next to a state park is a good idea? As obviously many speakers have already stated, our public green spaces and tourism industry have become very important to our society. I feel it's your duty, senators, to help us protect that from threats. We owe that to future generations. So why would you not be willing to protect those green spaces? Let me phrase it another way. Why would you be willing to sacrifice that for the interests of an out-of-state garbage corporation? You've heard the testimony from how many representatives today? You've received thousands of emails. So what it all boils down to, senators, is who are you going to side with? And are you going to listen to us, the citizens of this state, property owners, business owners, taxpayers? Are you going to do the right thing by protecting our New Hampshire state parks, which is what we're asking you to do? Or are you going to side with the lobbyists and employees of an out-of-state garbage corporation that has so little respect for our great state? Its intent is to import 9 million tons of out-of-state waste into New Hampshire and bury it only 190 feet from Forest Lake State Park. Who thinks that's going to help draw tourists?
I'm sorry to interrupt, Senator Avard. That's been 2.5 minutes.
Please, senators, do the right thing. Listen to the people of New Hampshire. Thank you. I'll take any questions.
Questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you very much, John.
The next person I have is Peter Blair.
Welcome, Peter.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, honorable members of the committee. My name is Peter Blair. I am an attorney with Conservation Law Foundation. Conservation Law Foundation appreciates the opportunity to comment on HB 177. We have submitted written testimony, but I will briefly go over our main points. CLF is a nonprofit environmental advocacy organization working to protect the environment and promote healthy communities in New Hampshire and across New England. We offer our full support of HB 177. This is a common sense measure that will protect New Hampshire state parks by imposing a 2-mile buffer between these important resources and prospective landfills. New Hampshire state parks were created for the use and enjoyment of all, now and for the future. These parks are diverse and special places of natural environment and cultural significances. The 2-mile buffer proposed by HB 177 is critical to protecting these areas from the negative impacts that always accompany landfills. CLF's Zero Waste Project works to address the unsustainable and numerous issues landfills create. This includes emission of noxious odors, spread of airborne dust and debris, attraction of pests and vermin, as well as increased regional and local traffic. Fires are also a significant concern. Landfill fires are especially dangerous as they emit harmful fumes from a wide array of waste that are contained in the facility. This includes carbon monoxide, hydrogen sulfide, and particulate matter. On average, 8,300 landfill fires occur in the US each year. Allowing the construction and operation of landfills within 2 miles of a state park may subject visitors to these impacts. In some instances, landfills may be visible from the state parks, which would break natural viewsheds. Even after landfills close, they are still a perpetual threat to the surrounding environment, as landfills, even those who only accept municipal solid waste, are known to contain harmful contaminants like volatile organic compounds and PCBs. There is increasing concern also about the level of PFAS in landfills. These forever chemicals must be handled with the utmost care. The dangerous substances are a significant concern because all landfills eventually leak. When the liner system placed under the buried waste may delay the leakage, these systems will eventually deteriorate over time and fail to contain this harmful and contaminating leachate. Once these liners fail, the leachate will begin polluting the surface and groundwaters indefinitely, as there is no way to repair the liners. In sum, I want to be respectful of your time. CLF strongly supports this measure. We feel that it is needed to protect New Hampshire state parks, and I'm glad to answer any questions you may have.
Questions from the committee? I just have one. How do we stop Massachusetts from bringing their garbage over our border?
That's a terrific question. And one way would be to stop development of private landfills. Across the border in Maine, they've really worked to take control of their landfills. They have state-owned landfills. And when the state controls the landfill, you can get around the Commerce Clause prohibition saying that you have to accept out-of-state waste. It's a state resource. You can control what goes into it when you have that ownership. I would look to Maine and next door to Vermont for examples, but I can definitely work with this committee and any legislators interested in addressing the out-of-state waste issues.
Thank you for your testimony. Anybody else want to, any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next I have Fred Anderson.
Welcome, Fred.
Let's see if I can unmute. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you, senators, for this opportunity. I have written to you, and so I will simply bring up to date what I think the major points are for consideration. I'm Fred Anderson. I own a home and I'm a full-time resident on Forest Lake in Whitefield, New Hampshire. I'm also president of the Forest Lake Association, and I urge you vote ought to pass for the following reasons. This bill, as much as Casella would like to say otherwise, is about promoting the private and public health, safety, and prosperity for everyone in the state of New Hampshire and beyond, those who love, use, and depend upon the state parks for rest, recreation, and livelihood. This bill is bipartisan, and it seeks the welfare of all of our citizens. This bill preserves the precious water resources that emerge from our parks, protecting them from the inevitable leakage of PFAS and other dangerous contaminants. Keeping water sources pure is essential to the health and safety of the people of New Hampshire and is an essential as well as valid constitutional exercise of this state's power. This bill reserves the rights of individual and public landowners in New Hampshire. Those whose greatest financial asset is in the value of their homes, such as me, and those for whom the state parks have been given in trust. Trust that you will preserve them for the good of all. This bill preserves and protects our state's economy, the second largest engine in our economy, which is so dependent upon tourism, the four seasonal sports industries, the associated food, beverage, and hospitality businesses across the state. This bill is neither arbitrary nor taking that matter out of local control with spot zoning. Some 15 states have adopted legislation exercising landfill buffer limits of some sort. 11 of them regarding state parks. 2 miles is rational. The current 200 feet is madness. Defining a buffer gives this state uniform standards rather than a series of arbitrary ones established locally. HB 177 is not spot zoning. It's good public policy, and it is a legitimate exercise of the state's constitutional authority to establish such zoning. As I said, this is not about Casella.
Sorry
as
to
much as
interrupt, Senator Avard, that's been 2.5 minutes.
Your last line of your comment there, Fred?
Ovid Lamontagne has sent you a letter that I requested him to send to you on the question of constitutionality, and I'd urge you to read it, as I think it addresses an awful lot of the concerns that we heard being raised when we were talking before the House. And as he says, quote, as valid and constitutional exercise of this state's power, HB 177 ought to pass, end quote. Thank you. I'll be glad to take whatever questions you might have.
Thank you, Fred. Questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your service.
Okay, next is Ovid Lamontagne.
Welcome, Ovid.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, good afternoon, Chairman Avard and members of the Energy and National Resources Committee. My name is Ovid Lamontagne, with the law firm of Bernstein Shore, appearing this afternoon in support of House Bill 177 on behalf of my client, Fred Anderson. I'm testifying today from the Lamontagne family camp, located on the northern shores of Lake Umbagog, where I can see the presidential range from my office window and is home to the Umbagog Lake State Park, one of the most populous state parks in New Hampshire's state parks system. This is why, for the first time in well over a decade, I've accepted an engagement to represent a client before the legislature, and consequently, I've registered as a lobbyist as required, work I rarely do. But when Mr. Anderson asked my law firm and me to provide this committee with our legal analysis about the constitutionality of House Bill 177, I could not say no. And last Friday afternoon, my letter summarizing our legal analysis was submitted to this committee, a copy of which you should all have. I've also submitted written testimony for this afternoon's hearing, and I just want to summarize a few of the points. Spot zoning has been raised as a potential obstacle to this bill. As I noted in my written comments, New Hampshire state law, as articulated by the New Hampshire Supreme Court, beginning in Miller versus Town of Tilton, makes clear that spot zoning only arises when property of a similar nature is treated differently without justification on the basis of health, safety, morals, or general welfare of the community, and which is not in accordance with a comprehensive plan. This is not spot zoning, and the case law supports HB 177 in that regard. It's also important to know that New Hampshire's public policy since the late 1800s has been in support of individual and collective state parks.
That's been 2.5 minutes.
Thank you.
Senator Avard, you're muted.
30 seconds to finish up. Moving.
I'm just going to articulate that the public policy of New Hampshire in support of state parks is codified in RSA 216A1, and where the legislature identifies the purposes of the state park, which is to conserve and protect and preserve our unique natural resources for the benefit of New Hampshire citizens and its visitors. And this is what HB 177 does. I ask you to vote to pass. Thank you.
Questions from the committee? Thank you very much, Owen, for your testimony.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you for your service.
All right,
Next is Karen Anderson.
welcome, Karen.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I will be as quick as I can. Thank you, senators, for allowing this opportunity. I'm actually speaking on behalf of our CEO, Richard Kantz, who is first day back from vacation and trying to juggle a lot of balls. So Goodwill of Northern New England, as you know, is a nonprofit social enterprise whose mission is to invest in people who need support to achieve both their life and their work goals. And in fact, our goal, our big goal over the next several years, is to move 10,000 people into personal stability by the year 2027. Currently, we operate 16 stores throughout the state of New Hampshire and provide services to more than 28,000 people throughout our 3-state footprint. We're committed to sustainable practices in all of our endeavors. And in 2020, we were able to divert more than 50 million pounds of stuff donated to us from landfills in Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont. So you might wonder why an organization like ours would be asking you to vote no on HB 177. In the last year, Goodwill disposed of just over 13 million pounds of unusable donations, which resulted in trash bills that added up to more than $1.2 million. This is a problem that we're heading face on, and we're asking our generous donors of stuff to be more mindful of what they're donating. And of course, we support the need for thoughtful and well-designed legislation that protects New Hampshire's environment in every way needed. It appears to us that environmental considerations are always central to any discussion regarding landfill development in New Hampshire. That should always remain the case and be a point of robust discussion. More specifically, Casella Waste Systems has been a vital partner with us in helping to achieve our triple bottom line sustainability goals, enhancing our facilities and expanding our knowledge around recycling. while helping us to grow our wraparound support programs. We were honored to accept the New Hampshire Businesses for Social Responsibility Partnership for Innovation Award alongside them in 2020. The facility, the facility under discussion today is expected to create somewhere between 45 and 60 good paying jobs.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Senator Avard, that's been 2.5 minutes.
I'll give you 30 seconds to wrap it up.
Okie dokie. We just urge you to consider both the environmental and the human unintended consequences of this bill, especially those that would impact some of New Hampshire's most vulnerable people. And we ask you to vote no. Thank you so much.
All right, questions from the committee? Refresh my memory on how this is going to affect vulnerable people.
We hire people who, especially in New Hampshire right now through our workforce programs, we're a big workforce development provider, who have been affected by substance use disorder, other personal significant barriers to being successful in traditional workplaces. And we have been partnering with Casella for some time successfully with this employment strategy.
Questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much, Karen. Appreciate your testimony.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, next I have Robin Pilotti. Robin.
Welcome, Robin.
Hi, thank you. My name is Robin Pilot. I own land in Dalton. We're moving there in 2 weeks, and I oppose this bill. I've been to the Bethlehem site of Costello's, and I haven't seen any flying birds or all the trash. We had brought garbage there, and because my husband's in construction, and we didn't see or smell all these things that everybody says that you're supposed to see. And I'm sorry, I'm nervous.
That's all right. We're all nervous here.
And I've also made phone calls because I like to do my research on something before I speak about it. I've made phone calls to the town's transfer stations and the garbage haulers around the area. And I've asked them questions having to do with what's going to happen when Bethlehem closes down. And a lot of them say the prices are going to go sky high, and they're not even sure if they're going to be able to stay in business because nobody can afford to pay, an outrageous amount of money to get their garbage hauled down to, say, Turnkey, because Carbury is pretty much going to be taken up with all the people that they already have garbage going to. And as far as the heavy traffic that's going to be going to the new one in Dalton, there's always been traffic here. We have truck traffic, we have pickups, we have all kinds of traffic. We have, it's just a scare tactic. There's not going to be that many trucks going to that site if it's there, because they're counting pickups that bring garbage there. They're counting dump trucks. They're not all tractor trailers. And also the state park itself, it gets shut down a couple of times a year due to E. coli. And it was closed down back in the 90s. Last year is the first year that the town people in Dalton went and cleaned up to open up the park.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Senator Avard, that's 2.5 minutes.
Robin, you got 30 seconds for a closing statement.
Okay, it's just the park has an issue with the park itself. The water is not clean and nobody uses it to drink out of and all that. I'm sorry, I'm really nervous.
That's okay. That's all right. No, don't just.
I want to just stress the point that it's not, the bill is not right. I really oppose it, and there's so many other people in Dalton that would be speaking out more if they weren't afraid of being bullied and harassed, which we're getting a lot of.
Robin, how are you getting bullied?
Well, you've already heard from one of the gentlemen. If we speak out, we get called skulls, we get called all kinds of names. And it's just, there's a lot of elderly people and they're just even afraid to go to the town building because our selectmen don't even listen to us. It's like you're afraid to even voice an opinion that isn't for, say, Forest Lake in our town. And Forest Lake has never been as famous as what it has been since this bill. It's like, we don't have the tourism going to that lake. It's less than 1,000 acres. It's not a pristine water. It's nothing like what they want you to believe. And I've lived in Dalton my whole life. And I know what I'm talking about. Pristine means you can drink it. And I've offered to pour a pitcher of water to these people and asked them if they would drink it. None of them will. And I don't blame them, I won't either. But it's like, and Costello's is going to be well over 200 feet away from that lake. It's like over 1,000 feet and then some. And last I knew, water doesn't flow uphill. And Dalton is hurting. It's very low income. The only ones that are really having a gripe about it are the ones that have camps on the lake. And half of them are not full-time people there. They're part-timers that are there for the summer. And it's like, I mean, I could keep going on here now that I'm on a roll, I'm feeling more comfortable. But there's issues, and I'm talking to DES guy now about some of the concerns having to do with that lake. Just to get, I'd love to have it pristine. I'd love to have it safe for children to go swimming in it. But when you take dead beavers off from a beach that they bury instead of having them tested, there's a big issue. Why did those beavers die? You know, why is there E. coli all the time? Why are all these issues coming up, and why do we have to cover them up? It's like, it really needs, you really need to come and check it out, I guess is what I'm saying. Check out the whole situation so you actually see the lake we're talking about that you're putting a bill on.
Robin, we really appreciate your testimony, and I'm going to ask the committee, are there any questions that you'd like to ask Robin? Well, we don't approve of any bullying, and that's intolerable, actually. So I hope this will end, but we really do appreciate your testimony, and thank you for coming. And
thank you for hearing me. Bye.
You're very welcome. Cameron?
Okay, next I have Pamela Cason. Pam, you should be able to, there you go.
Hi.
Welcome, Pam.
Hi. Thank you all for giving me the chance to let you hear my testimony today. I have lived in Dalton for 20 years. My family's been there for generations, but not as seasonal visitors. I feel that Dalton, the true residents, should decide what is best for them, not the Forest Lake faction of activists who join with other activist groups like NCAC and CLF to push their agenda. Forest Lake would have become a campground years ago if there was an interest to do so. But now we must develop a campground because this supposedly will make money for Dalton, and it's a great excuse for not getting the landfill in. Why didn't Forest Lakers develop a campground a long time ago? They've been seasonably here on and off for years. This is just like enacting emergency zoning after never having zoning in Dalton. Sounds like plans specifically to keep a landfill out. What is best for Dalton is a financial boost that we would receive from this landfill. Yes, it would provide tax relief to many, but we should not be harassed and embarrassed in wanting to have some tax relief. But we are being harassed. We get all kinds of harassment from these groups, from videos to stalking and ridiculing. Outsiders making decisions for us because they feel the average resident is an idiot, incapable of making proper decisions for their town. They are a group of well-to-do elitists, no better than pedigreed dogs, and I do love dogs, trying to push their agendas. The rest of us are not. We're a proud group of local people in a small town. I ask you to oppose HB 177 to hear the little guy who needs your help. We are not nationwide. We are not rich. We are just local Dalton residents who want to survive. I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Pam, for speaking up and for not being afraid of being bullied. Do you have examples of the harassments and videos and stalking available to share with the committee if you had the ability?
I could send you a lot of stuff that's on YouTube right now.
Please do.
Okay, and where would you like me to direct that?
Griffin, where would we send that?
I will follow up with her by email.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Pam. We appreciate it.
Okay, the next person I have is Catherine Corcory. Catherine, if you're here under the Zoom NHGR Club, can you rate? Yep, there you go. All right. Catherine, you should be able to unmute.
That's me. Thank you. Thank you so much, Senators. My name is Catherine Corcory. I represent New Hampshire Sierra Club. I'm the chapter director. And we represent over 20,000 members and supporters in the Granite State. I really appreciate your time and effort on this bill. I know you expect a long day, so I will be brief. The chapter is in support of the passage of HB 177 to protect all state parks for generations to come from siting landfills within a 2-mile radius. Pardon me. The Sierra Club's motto is explore, enjoy, and protect the earth. The main issue of HB 177 is recognizing the critical importance of all state parks and the benefits that the public derives from them. Benefits we all as humans gain from being outdoors are enormous and essential, especially during the challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic. We all have been to the state parks and on trails and the federal national forests as well. And the state parks throughout the state provide that essential space and recreation, but also employment and a statewide network for not only the residents of our state, but for the many people who visit every year. We've heard about the economic driver that the whole state park system is for our state, and the importance that the state parks provide for our economy and the employment in these rural areas across the state. And I also want to point out that these state parks protect rare habitat for wildlife and flora and fauna. They are picked out over centuries because of their unique and important biodiversity. Some of our state parks have some of the most rare forests within them. And they're the only place that you can find.
Sorry to interrupt, Senator Avard, that's been 2.5 minutes.
30 seconds to wrap it up.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry. I practice too. These state parks are some of the only places for these kinds of areas. They are special, and they deserve a higher level of protection. And having a 2-mile radius around state parks is a great way to signify that importance. We've heard that other states have similar regulations for state parks, and this is something that has a tried and true policy in other states, and it would be good for our state to follow that. I am happy to take any questions. And I wanted to point out that 14 senators have state parks within their districts. Thank you very much.
Questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, next I have Elliot Wessler.
Welcome, Elliot.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman Avard and committee members. Thank you for holding this meeting. I'm the president of the board and directors of NCABC. Together with a number of other grassroots organizations, we represent thousands of New Hampshire voters in the North Country and throughout the state that support passage of HB 177. We understand that New Hampshire legislature appreciates and prefers simple bills, and HB 177 is all that. It's been tested in the New Hampshire House, and against long odds, it won on a bipartisan vote. That's because it's a good bill and it reflects New Hampshire values. It bears repeating again and again, this bill will not cost New Hampshire taxpayers a cent. We've counted at least 9 arguments that have been made by opponents of this bill that are simply not true or are misleading at best. Not one of these arguments should give the Senate any pause. We've analyzed these 9 arguments. They are in the NCABC fact sheets that we have sent to the committee members. Our principal point that we want to make is this legislation is needed and it's needed now. We think it's wishful thinking that we can rely on DES to protect our state parks. By its own admission, DES is underfunded and understaffed, and it's operating under outdated and possibly even illegal procedures. In a nutshell, DES's waste management program does not have the resources or the perspective it needs to protect our state parks. We think the New Hampshire legislature and the governor have to face this reality and enact HB 177. Obviously, it will not solve all of DES's problems, but by God, it is a good start. Senators that support HB 177 are throwing their lot with a lot of good things. First, the world's changed and DES needs to update its procedures and rules. They have not been updated in 20 years. Second, our state parks are treasured
Sorry,
resources.
Senator Avard, that's been 20 minutes or 2.5 minutes. I'm sorry.
30 seconds to wrap, Elliot, 30 seconds to wrap it
May
up.
I finish? Thank you. Our final point, and it's a concession, is there actually is one, but only one downside to enacting 177. And that is that Casella will have to go back to the drawing board if it wants to build a new landfill in New Hampshire. That's good. It's not bad, because the Dalton site is possibly the worst possible site for a landfill ever proposed in all of New England. I'm happy to take any questions.
Questions from the committee? Seeing none. Is Mike Wimsatt available still?
Mike, if you're here, can you raise your hand? Yes, yep, Mike's here. Mike?
Mike, thank you for, just a couple of people have mentioned this, and so I figured I'd give you a shot to answer them. One of them was DES cannot protect our state parks. Rules haven't been up, they have not been updated for 20 years. Where's, could you comment on that?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
I apologize. Last couple of people have talked about DS not being able to protect our state parks and that the rules have not been updated for 20 years. Is that correct?
No, the second part of that is not correct. What the caller or what the person may be referring to is our state solid waste plan has not been updated since 2003. Our rules, our administrative rules, which are used to implement the statute and regulate solid waste facilities, have been modified a number of times since that time and are constantly under a state of revision in various parts.
And the first question was DES cannot protect our state parks.
I guess I would go back to what I said before, and that is that, DES's role in permitting is to apply the rules and standards that are set out in the statute and the administrative rules. And a facility that meets those requirements, if they meet them fully, will typically get a permit. And if they don't meet those requirements, they won't get a permit. I'm not prepared to answer the question of protect state parks because I'm not sure what the definition of that is.
And apparently there is a point of DES is underfunded. Would you agree with that?
So the committee that was referenced before that Representative Megan, now I forget her last name, but Representative Ebel stood up a committee a couple of years ago that evaluated this question in detail, and her committee, as a result of a bill that was created, took testimony from about 50 persons representing all sorts of interests in the solid waste realm. And they explored at some level, and it came up in testimony from a number of those persons that the agency's program for solid waste management has been underfunded for a number of years due to budget cuts that occurred more than 20 years ago, particularly with respect to solid waste planning. And so that's one of the reasons why the agency is behind in updating the solid waste management plan. However, I am happy to report that the current budget, if it were to pass, does provide significant funding. And if all those positions are funded and we're allowed to hire them, we will be able to stand up a very solid program. Right now, as a result of those cuts, but also through sort of retirements that occurred and the inability to fill those positions over time, we have a fairly thin staff right now. But our expectation is in the coming biennium, we will be standing up that and reinvigorating our planning efforts.
And are you aware of any updates on the solid waste plans?
So, matter of fact, there is a bill in play right now that would reestablish that requirement and set it an update to the solid waste management plan to be due in the fall of 2022.
Do you know what bill that is?
Beg your pardon?
What bill is that?
It's Senate Bill 146. It's part of an omnibus environmental bill that Senator Waters is involved with.
Thank you. I'm doing this for the public benefit, by the way. I know that I want people to understand that this is, there are things that are going on, and we want to thank Senator Waters for his hard work on this, by the way. Can you stick around in case we have some more questions? When we hear testimony, I like them verified, or if they involve you, I'd like you to be able to have a say in it. That's all. So thank you very much, Mike, and we'll move on to our next person.
Okay, next I have Amy Manzelli.
Welcome, Amy.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chairman Avard and esteemed members of the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee. My name is Amy Manzelli from the law firm of BCM Environmental and Land Law. I'm here this afternoon representing the North Country Alliance for Balanced Change in support of HB 177 to testify that HB 177 would be constitutional. In summary, the two most mentioned constitutional challenges are takings and dormant commerce clause, but HB 177 would not violate either of these. HB 177 would not prohibit any other land use within this buffer or setback, so it would not in any way be an unconstitutional taking, and it would apply to all new landfills, regardless of whether they are owned or controlled by interests in state, out of state, or both. That means that HB 177 would in no way violate the Dormant Commerce Clause. I have a few quick details to support this key point that HB 177 would be constitutional. There is no reported court case, not in New Hampshire, not anywhere in the country, that stands for the proposition that protecting parks with a 2-mile setback or buffer would be unconstitutional. In fact, the closest thing is a law in North Carolina where the Court of Appeals there decided that law was constitutional. Now, the law in that case, among other things, it prohibited landfills within 5 miles of the outermost boundary of a national wildlife refuge, 1 mile of the outermost boundary of a state game land, and 2 miles of the outermost boundary of a component of the state parks system. So it's a little bit different than what we have here, but the closest thing out there in a reported case decision, and importantly, constitutional. Buffers and setbacks such as this, they're constitutional. Some of these types of laws have been challenged in New Hampshire.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Senator Avard, that's been 2.5 minutes.
Amy, 30 seconds to wrap it up.
Thank you. The New Hampshire Supreme Court has repeatedly decided that these types of buffers are constitutional. Some examples of the laws that you're probably familiar with, for example, the Shoreland Protection Act, where there are a variety of use limitations within the 250 feet of the shoreland. So by any measure, HB 177 would not be unconstitutional. Any argument of constitutionality is meritless, and I urge you to support HB 177 on these grounds. I welcome any questions. I thank you for your attention to my comments and for your service on this committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amy. Questions from the committee? Seeing none, we're down to 26 speakers.
Thank you all.
All righty.
The next person I have is Adam Finkel.
Welcome, Adam.
Hello there. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Thank you. You guys have been really patient. I appreciate all of your time. Boy, I dearly wish I had more time. I understand 150 seconds. I teach and have taught at grad schools of public health, law, economics, public policy, and medicine. So I'd love to combat all of the misinformation I've heard today about the magic groundwater barrier, about the bullying in Dalton, about the water quality in Forest Lake. I've taken water samples here myself and they're pristine. I would just ask you to please read. I sent you all a 2-pager on important numbers to remember about this bill. I sent a little sermonette about how property rights work. I'll just summarize my 6 points in the next 50 seconds. 1, 2 miles fixes a glaring mistake in the DES code. I sent you information about distance is time when it comes to groundwater pollution. And I sent you some information about at Casella's own published estimate of how fast the groundwater moves at the Forest Lake site. It is only weeks to traverse the 175 feet to the state park, at least giving us a couple of years lead time. When they only have to monitor groundwater semi-annually, gives the state and the people a fighting chance of intercepting and detecting a plume before it pollutes a lake or a state park. Number 2, separating incompatible uses is not rocket science, it's not zoning, and it's not a slippery slope to anywhere. The list of things you can't do or build anywhere near a military base is longer than my testimony. 3, I used to run a federal regulatory agency under both President Clinton and President George W. Bush. DES needs direction that only you can provide. With respect to Director Wimsatt, my colleague Elliot Wessler is right. They have not complied with federal law, and they have not updated in 21 years the mistake in their code that allows a 10,000 foot setback to airports, when the US Republican Congress voted overwhelmingly in 2000 to set a 6-mile federal all across the nation buffer between airports and new landfills. And their code still says 10,000 feet. There are mistakes in this code, and the 100-foot barrier is one of them. When I ran a federal regulatory agency, we welcomed general policy oversight from our legislature. This is general policy oversight. Number 4, taking 9% of land out of circulation will have zero impact on the supply, demand, and cost of landfilling. Would you laugh someone out of a hearing who said that not allowing liquor stores next to grammar schools will be the end of the liquor industry? I hope you would laugh them out.
Senator Avard, that's been 2.5 minutes.
30 seconds, Adam.
Thank you. I wish you would read about property rights. The way economics works is that when a buyer and a seller are told that their transaction is against public policy, they have a recourse. The buyer can sell to anyone else, and the seller can go anywhere else. But the homeowners whose property values will be crushed, the environment, these losses are total and they are non-recompensable. No one will make us whole. So we look to you with thanks to balance competing interests, and there is no contest here. If I could quote one thing, it would be a fictional quote from Mr. Spock of Star Trek, who said, "The needs of the many outweigh the whims of the few or the one." And that's what this bill is about. Thank you.
Questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Okay, the next person I have is Kevin Whittam Sr.
Welcome, Kevin.
Kevin, you should be able to unmute yourself. Okay, I will. Oh, Kevin.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Wow, I know there's been a lot of testimony gone on today because I've been here since 1 o'clock, patiently waiting, so you'll have to bear with me. My name is Kevin Whittam, and I am a Dalton resident, and I oppose this House Bill 177 for the following reasons, and this is just a few of many. It takes the decision making out of the townspeople that are made up of a lot of elderly people, retired people, and poor people. Now, they're not poor, the ones that are really been going on about what is good and what is bad. It should be up to us, the town of Dalton, and the residents, not the select board, the residents, because the select board is supposed to work for the townspeople, and they are not working for the townspeople. Let me see, one of them is DES has sufficient scientific process for siting landfills. It's like, why do we even have them? If nobody believes the controls that they have and they don't believe in them, why are we even spending money on that? So I'll go on. All right, to get back to the water quality, but they talked about pristine lake. I know we heard some of this before, but I've lived here for my whole life, 64 years. The water quality in Forest Lake has been an issue for many years. The state has been inactive in the maintenance of this lake for the past 15 plus years. So it's only Forest Lake State Park in name only. The state hasn't even been doing anything. So we are fortunate enough to have a place to a site for this landfill that is a logical location in its perfect location for the areas that depend on the economy that this is going to help if they move in, if Casella moves in. And it'll greatly benefit the townspeople if we're allowed, because we could drop the taxes in the town of Dalton. Casella is not going to make an offer to the town and then not fulfill their promise to the town. So the select board that's in there right now is John Swann's wife, which is the chairperson of the selectmen that lives on Forest Lake. John Swan, every encounter we've had with him, he's rude, he's disruptive. An example I can give you this weekend, I know time's short.
That's been 2.5 minutes.
All right, I need
30 seconds, Kevin.
All right, we as the town people or the voters of the town of Dalton put together a rally, a protest at the transfer station in Dalton. We were there handing out paperwork, talking to people. A guy comes in that we recognize, he leaves and he almost squeals his tire. And 20 minutes later, John Swan pulled up in his Jeep, sitting there, asking us all kinds of questions, how much money we made. I told him we're none of his business. He's filming the whole thing. He's filming us. He's filming our vehicles. And he posted this stuff on the internet. And from what I understand, he has 5 aliases. So 5 different people gives you the impression there's 5 different people all saying the same thing when in reality it's one person, Mr. Swan. And we're getting a little bit tired of him showing up and causing problems, untrue information, exaggeration. So I'm just asking you to let this be DES and the townspeople of Dalton control this, and we shouldn't be controlled by you. That's my opinion, sir. So thank you very much for this opportunity to speak. I'm a little bit wound up because I've listened to a lot of garbage on your way today.
No pun intended, right, Kevin?
Right.
Questions from the committee? Kevin, do you feel as though there are town folks being bullied because somebody, a couple folk said that they were feeling as though they were being bullied?
Yeah.
And one individual said, there's no bullying going on.
Right, I know they always say that, but we have elderly people that are trying to work for the town. One particular person is the treasurer and the tax collector. They cannot get any information from the select board of Dalton because they happen to oppose their belief. So now there's no communication. We're not going to communicate with them. We can't even get a budget hearing that we can speak our mind to and have no idea what the money is. It's a town issue and it's blown way out of proportion. And I don't know about you listening to this stuff, but I have to listen to it every week, all the time from these people, just because we don't agree with them.
Well, thank you for hanging on since 1 o'clock. I really appreciate your input.
Well, it is very important. And I know everybody has their own opinion, but by you passing this bill, now it completely takes it out of our hands. We can't even make a choice because you made it for us. And I don't believe that should be done that way.
Thank you, Kevin. We appreciate your testimony.
Well, thank you for listening to me. I'm a little cranked up listening to all this stuff today. So, and I have to live it. I'm not only listening and seeing it, I have to live it every week.
Thank you very much. Cameron?
The next person I have is Alex Katrubis.
Welcome, Alex.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Alex Katrubis. I'm here in my capacity as the Executive Director of AC East New Hampshire. We are the voice of the engineering industry. As requested, I've cut my testimony quite a bit to get as close to 2 minutes. I will email you my full remarks. We are strongly opposed to this legislation. We do not believe that the legislature should be passing statewide zoning to derail one project. We've heard the same dire rhetoric from opponents of high-profile projects for decades. In recent years, between 2012 and 2018, there were no less than 9 pieces of legislation filed to try and kill the Northern Pass. Each and every single bill died. The same can be said for the Kinder Morgan pipeline. That project was withdrawn, but legislative bills to derail the project were rejected. For example, in 2019, under Chairman Bob Backus, Rep. Kenneth Vincent wrote for the 17-2 majority of the House Science and Technology Committee, quote, "The committee believes legislation in this area to be impractical and unwarranted," end of quote. The bill was killed. The Kinder Morgan pipeline and the Northern Pass may or may not have been good ideas for New Hampshire, but we believe that legislating against specific public works projects is a very bad idea. We see the same types of opposition around affordable housing and other types of reasonable and well-regulated development in the state of New Hampshire. Why is energy so expensive? Why is housing so scarce and not affordable? We can't ignore these factors. I was going to go through this in a little more detail, but the reality is New Hampshire currently sends almost 10% of its own trash and virtually all of its recycling out of state. This project will help bring a recycling plant to New Hampshire. And my final point is on landfill capacity. This is what the New Hampshire Municipal Association recently said, quote, "Prohibiting new landfills hardly seems like a solution. Trash has to go somewhere. Existing landfills have finite capacity and recycling options are drying up, at least temporarily. When the existing facilities are full, the principal option remaining for municipalities will be to send their waste to out-of-state facilities at dramatically increased costs." As you heard before, this committee has heard testimony this month saying that the issue of limited landfill capacity is a major problem for the state of New
I'm
Hampshire.
sorry to interrupt, Senator Avard. That's 2.5 minutes.
30 seconds to wrap it up, Alex.
Sure. Let me just say this. If the DES approves this project, it will be a safe and secure landfill designed by a team of qualified geologists and engineers who are experts in this field. We have a process to site landfills in this state, and we should follow that process. Thank you very much for listening.
Questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Next, I have Steve Tringaris.
Steve?
Good afternoon, everybody. Senator Avard, members of the committee, thank you. My name is Steve Changaris. I'm going to try to beat that minute 30 and get you off a little early. I have submitted written testimony. I work for the private recycling and waste management industry in New Hampshire in the Northeast. We're opposed to this bill. We think it's changing the rules in the middle of the game and that the process should allow to play out. I had high residents. What the previous speaker essentially was speaking for any proponent of any facility that has a regulatory process that might encounter a NIMBY or trigger a local negative reaction. Let the process play out under the rules and regulations, the comprehensive rules and regulations and laws of the state. Changing it midstream is what we consider unfair. It's, being in a 9-inning ball game and being told you got to play 10 innings, but it's not a tie. So, the commentary is written. We run good facilities. The DES does a good job. And, we appreciate your thoughtful review of this. And, you have a lot of equities to balance. So on that note, I'll finish. But thank you very much for your time and effort. We're here for the industry. It's an important asset to develop. And we'd like to see that process continue on its own merits.
Thank you, Steve. Questions from the committee? Seeing none.
Thank you.
Okay, next I have David Leonard.
Welcome, David. David?
David, you should be able to unmute. Okay, David?
David, yep, I'm here.
Welcome, David.
Yes, thank you for allowing me to speak. And thank you, senators, for taking the time this afternoon to hear out some of the residents from up here. My name is David Leonard. I'm a resident of Whitefield. I was born in Littleton. I grew up in Lancaster. I spent many days at my uncle's camp on Forest Lake. I oppose House Bill 177. I've sat here for the last almost 3 hours listening to a lot of the same things that I've heard over the last year. I started a Facebook group called North Country Trash Talk to try to dispute some of the fallacies. One of the biggest fallacies that I've heard today is they talk about 168-acre landfill. The landfill is only going to be 137 acres for one. Number two, there's 93 state parks in this state, and that's according to the state park website. You take 2 miles around each of those, that's a lot of acreage that will not be available for any sort of use. We only have 5,800 usable acres of land in this state. You start taking out 10,000 feet for airport, 300 feet for each of the highways in the state. you've used up about 4 million acres out of the 5,800. The actual landfill is going to be 2,800 feet from Forest Lake itself. The 180 that you've heard today is just the distance to the westernmost border of the state park. I've documented the harassment that the residents of Dalton have received on my Facebook page. Trying to look at my notes here, sorry. As far as I've also heard numerous people compare New Hampshire to the states of Georgia, the Carolinas, some of the other states that have got 2 or 3 miles worth of a boundary. Well, they've got a lot more.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Senator Avard. That's been 2.5 minutes.
David, wrap it up in 30 if you can.
I can do that. They've got a lot more land mass than we have. Therefore, they could probably have the 2 or 3 mile, 4 mile boundary. As far as the harassment in town, I can think of one story, one female who tried to stay out of the fray, but got dragged into it. Mr. Swan found a piece of paper with her name and address on it and attacked her on Facebook, posting the piece of paper with her name and address on it, which in my mind put this female in jeopardy. To put a female's name and address out over social media and excoriate her for one piece of paper that was dropped. I thank you again for your time this afternoon. And I hope you vote against HB 177. And I'm open to any other questions.
Questions for David Leonard from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony, David.
Next, I have Nina Webb.
Welcome, Nina. Nina?
Oops.
That's good. We can hear
Is that, can you hear me now?
you. Yes.
Awesome. Okay. Hello, senators. Thank you for your service representing the people and taking the time to hear my statement about the state parks of New Hampshire. I'm going to start by saying that I feel incredibly lucky to be from the White Mountains of New Hampshire. I think most of us do not understand what we truly have here. It is a privilege to live in a place that offers invaluable resources like fresh water and forests that have been gifted to us. I'll be damned if the folks voting today think that a short-term profit is worth a dead end for the White Mountains of New Hampshire. If this bill does not pass, there is no going back. It is a bad deal. These privatized landfills prioritize their pockets, not the stakeholders. In fact, this company in particular, Casella, makes their money by hauling out-of-state trash to our backyards. Casella has a history of scandals. Southbridge, Mass. had a Casella-owned and operated landfill that contaminated residential drinking wells, which has yet to be fixed. We're talking millions of dollars in repair for the failed operation and maintenance. Another being a fine of $1 million to the state of Vermont for breaking the law and not following protocol at their only operating landfill in Vermont, which is located in Coventry. $1 million is no slap on the wrist. And just recently, at the Casella landfill in my hometown, Bethlehem, NCES failed to comply with the height restriction and somehow managed to grow 16 feet higher, almost a 2-story building higher, illegally. How does this happen? And is this the type of business we want to continue to allow to operate with absolutely no boundaries? And I'd like to touch on the tax benefit, the tax break that these host towns are offered when landfills move to their town. My town, Bethlehem, has spent millions of dollars in legal fees over battling Casella and their expansions for over 15 years. The benefit of being the host is not a benefit at all. I'll finish up by saying, let us not be branded by the mountains of trash, but by the mountains that bring us our cool air, fresh water, adventure, and awe that folks travel near and far for. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Nina. Appreciate your testimony. Questions from the committee? Seeing none.
Okay, the next person I have is Sarah Doucette.
Sarah?
Sarah, you should be able to unmute.
Yes, thank you. Do you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you. So my name is Sarah Doucette. I live in Whitefield, New Hampshire, and good day to all of you. And thank you for this time we're taking together. I do have some brief prepared statements. I want to tell you two things about previous testimony. Some of the folks from Dalton have testified to poor water quality at Forest Lake. I've lived here over 50 years. I'd be happy to send you the results of tests that are done annually that have been remarkably clear and clean. I would like to say too that the women of the select board in Dalton are absolutely available and have impeccable integrity in my experience. And I've been watching this closely for 2.5 years. People who live around Forest Lake are, many of them, 5-generation families like my own. So I don't want to go down this road any further, but I'm very available to discuss any of these things. I also wanted to mention that comment about DES not protecting the parks from landfills. And I mean, I think what it really is being said is that the current regulations would not necessarily stop a landfill beside a state park. So that's the essence of that statement that I'm sure you've heard a lot. So respectfully, I want to ask you to all stand back a little from the agitation around this bill and consider its fundamental simplicity and good sense. You've been asked to plunge down a good number of misleading rabbit holes, in my opinion, that suggest the bill somehow infringes on the rights of a citizen seller and a private buyer. Together, such self-interested parties could impose a devastating landfill on a park treasured by concentric circles of park users. Many of them are neighbors with property rights themselves, and also countless New Hampshire visitors and others who bolster our economy with a fierce loyalty that runs through many generations. So this bill does not present a clash of equally weighted values. Further, it is not about questioning the right of the legislature to legislate, not about spot zoning, thwarted property rights of sellers, thwarted dreams of corporations, or quibbling about buffer mileage and threats of landfill capacity shortages. My research over 2.5 years concludes that is all smoke and mirrors. Solid rebuttals have been presented to you by countless credible speakers and writers, including North Country Alliance for Balanced Change. House Bill 177 is a question of safeguarding the joy and legacy of our parks, the very identity of our stunning.
Senator Avard, that's 2.5 minutes.
Sarah, can you wrap it up in 30 seconds, please?
Of course. The question of safeguarding the identity of our stunning state and the values we citizens hold most dear. Given the facts at hand and recalling the state parks that you and your constituents love, I hope you will vote yes, ought to pass in a heartbeat. You do have my thanks for your thoughtful service to New Hampshire and its people.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Other questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
The next person I have is Wayne Morrison. There's a Nancy Morrison in the Zoom. Wayne, if that's you, could you raise your hand and I'll call on you? All right. Wayne, you should be able to unmute.
Wayne or Nancy?
You're gonna get, unfortunately, you got Wayne.
Oh, that's fine, Wayne. We got you, man.
All right. I'm gonna do the best for my better half.
All right.
We just have obviously a lot of testimony. We really appreciate the time and the energy that you're putting into this. It's obviously a passionate topic for a lot of us. To me, this distills down to a couple of key things that we're asking you to make a choice on. We've talked a lot about landfills and state parks, but those two things are really incompatible land uses. We're not against landfills. In fact, we're realists. We know that no matter what we do, even if we do a really good job of reducing, recycling, composting, there's going to be a need for landfilling. This is really about siting a landfill. And it is our belief that this particular site, it's hard to have this conversation. This is about all of the 68 state parks in the state. But because there's a landfill right in front of us that's threatening Forest Lake and Forest Lake State Park, we have to say, why in the world would you pick that particular site? It's a pristine area. It's beautiful land. It's a lake. It's area that we want to be. If you had to pick any place in the world to protect, if you stood there, you'd say you'd never put a landfill in that location. So it's really about making it you could line up a bunch of sixth graders and ask them if you think it's a good idea to situate a landfill within a couple hundred feet of a state park or a lake. It makes no sense. It really is, I believe, it's an economically sound decision for the developer. We have a willing landowner, but it makes no sense for the state of New Hampshire. And when you think about what they're really talking about doing, they're talking about taking in almost 50% of the trash from Connecticut and from Rhode Island and from New York and from other states and burying it in our mountains next to our lakes, our rivers, and our streams. And I can't believe that you, as a committee that's involved in trying to protect our environment and our state and doing what's best for our economy, would ever view that as a sound policy. So I ask you to, when all of the noise kind of dies down, you'd have to say at its simplest, does it make sense to locate a 180-acre landfill next to a state park that closely? And I think what we're saying is, whenever those regulations were first developed, there's a gap, there's a mistake, it needs to be fixed. Like any law, there's not tablets that come down from the mountain that never get changed. We're asking you to take a look at this, protect our state parks, and make the legislative move that's necessary to really give DES the mandate to protect our state parks. I sent you a package with opposition, the breadth and the depth of the opposition to this landfill sited in Dalton, which is really not just a Dalton decision, it's a regional impact. And if you think about all the surrounding.
Senator Avard, that's been 2.5 minutes.
Wayne, can you wrap it up in 30 seconds, please?
I sure can. If you want to know what the people of the area really think, warrant articles from all of the surrounding towns, conservation committees from 6 or 7 towns surrounding the area that would be affected, environmental groups, the overwhelming opposition to this siting of this landfill is clear. And I think you get that same reaction, not only in this particular site, but if you picked any of the 68 state parks and you asked people in that area how they felt about putting a landfill next to one of their state parks, you get the same reaction. It's an overwhelming opposition to what is a really bad idea. Thank you.
Questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much, Wayne.
Next, I have Nancy Middleman.
Welcome, Nancy.
Thank you for being here and listening to all of us. This has been a very heated discussion. Members of my family have lived and vacationed in the North Country, and specifically Franconia, Bethlehem, and Dalton for over 50 years. Originally, we were escaping the hecticness of New York, and my folks moved there in 1971 and bought Rayner's Motor Lodge in Franconia, New Hampshire, ran it for 14 years, and then retired to Forest Lake, where they lived full time. And it is with great pleasure that I continue owning this house and bringing it full circle to my children. We used to vacation at Forest Lake every summer since the 1950s. And we ask that you protect this incredible treasure of the North Country, not only for ourselves, but for future generations, for our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren and beyond. I would like to say, as a community member of Dalton, that it is a small community. It has a population of less than 1,000, but the impact that your decision is going to have goes far beyond the borders of Dalton itself, affecting Whitefield, Bethlehem, Littleton, Carroll, as was mentioned before, many towns in the surrounding area, and in fact, the entire North Country, and bringing tourism to the area also. Our state parks are the property of the New Hampshire citizens, and the development that affects them should reflect the opinions, I believe, of a greater number of people. And it seems to me that the New Hampshire legislature is a very appropriate body to be considering this problem. There are very many things that make our state great and draw tourists to the area, and it is precisely New Hampshire's iconic beauty and diversity of flora and fauna that draws people. I do believe that people have felt bullied on both sides of the aisle. This has become a very heated discussion. I would like to clarify in response to some previous statements made. Select persons in Dalton are elected officials. They are elected by the people of Dalton, and therefore they are following and representing their constituents. So I don't think it's fair to say that they are some body of, people hijacking the town of Dalton.
Senator Avard, that's been 2.5 minutes.
Okay.
Could you wrap it up in 30 seconds, please?
Thank you. I would also just like to point out again that, as someone said, there have been many infractions. The DES and the letters by the Waste Management that was said before, these are directives that are by and large self-directed. There are no real enforcement policies that can be made. So again, I ask you to look at all the infractions of this company and others concerning landfills. I would like to mention that the size of the landfill is not much smaller than the size of Forest Lake itself. The landfill is really, Casella says, with infrastructure is 180 acres. Forest Lake is only 192 acres. So this landfill would be almost as big as the lake itself. So I ask you again to please vote in favor of House Bill 177, protecting our water, our flora, our fauna, ourself, our sanity. And I thank you very much for listening to all of us. Just my heart breaks when I think of destroying the beautiful North Country that we have. We are there because of its serenity. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Questions from the committee? And seeing none. Thank you very much.
The next person I have is John Tuttle. John, you're on the phone. You might need to dial *6 to unmute.
Welcome, John.
Hello.
Hello.
This is John Tuthill. I live in Ackworth, New Hampshire. Former state legislator on the E&A committee about 20 years ago when solid waste issues were being addressed. Been a selectman on the Regional Planning Commission in the Upper Valley. I've been dealing with solid waste issues going well back into the mid-'80s. I think one of the key issues that the Senate committee needs to consider is the passage of time since New Hampshire's policies, statutes regarding solid waste, and particularly rules, standards, and permitting processes has last been really thoroughly examined. This project is of a magnitude where it would not be inappropriate if you had a body such as the Site Evaluation Committee taking this up. To get away from the local conflict as well as the obvious politics which are going to arise as soon as we're dealing with this in the general court. I realize that is not going to happen, that we're dealing with the system that we have, but I think really it's important now to recognize privatization. We are close to a monopoly situation, although there are environmental regulations, well outdated as I said. This is the sort of industry that has come so close now to being a monopoly that I think we need to even consider whether or not we should be managing these public services as a utility, and whether or not the kind of review you would get with an electric utility, for example, or communication, not be appropriate. I would say on the back of the envelope, you're probably looking at a $2 billion package in terms of gross revenue with the project as proposed, what we've been able to see of it. These are very, very significant long-term projects with enormous potential impact. So I would strongly urge the committee to use HB 177 as a way to hit the pause button and to back up and bring New Hampshire's solid waste planning and regulation into the 21st century. A lot has changed since the 80s when the private industry emerged. And I think that it would be in the best interest of the state and of the residents to really take the time to get this right and not be pushed forward. I recall in Bethlehem, early on when Casella had first arrived there, Danko was getting out.
Can you wrap it up?
Thank you. I will wrap up. I recall a DES official saying at that time when Casella was first getting into Bethlehem, during a public hearing well attended by local citizens who were concerned about the transfer of ownership and the potential expansion of that facility. The DES's statement at the time by a lead permitting engineer was that our hands are tied, we must issue the permit. That was based on a set of rules and regulations that are not particularly different than they are today. And the world has changed dramatically since that time. Thank you very much. And I urge you to support HB 177.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your service in the House. And questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you very much.
Okay, next I have David Creer.
Welcome, David.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for allowing me to speak. My name is David Creer. I am Director of Public Policy at the Business and Industry Association. We oppose House Bill 177 because of simple economics. You're going to limit the availability of landfill capacity in the state. And as you've already heard testimony on, capacity is already dwindling in the state. And as you limit that capacity, the tipping fees or the costs for depositing your solid waste will go up. This will mean extra costs for businesses. With that, I know you've heard a lot of testimony, so I'm happy to end there and answer any questions that anyone would have.
Thank you for your brevity and clarity. Questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you, David.
Great, thank you.
Next, I have Scott Hazelton.
Welcome, Scott.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Excuse me. Thank you, senators, for hearing me. So I'd like to express my opposition towards this bill. I'm the highway director for the town of Sunapee, and I'm responsible for managing and directing the town's transfer station. Annual operations, including the locations and methods of which we dispose of our solid waste material. Currently, the residents of the town of Sunapee and the residents of the town of Springfield deliver approximately 1,800 tons to Bethlehem, New Hampshire. And at a tipping fee right now of under $60, our transfer station costs are roughly $70,000 to $80,000, depending on what we bring them. Estimates show that the North Country Environmental Services landfill will reach its capacity within the next 5 years, plus or minus, which may result with a significant number of municipalities, both in and out of state, searching for a place to dispose of their solid waste products at an additional cost. And as the person just before me stated, those costs could be significant. And I will keep this brief as well. In some simple math, just the town of Sunapee's costs could increase at our transfer station by $75,000 if we had to go to the other two available facilities in the state of New Hampshire. If we had to go out of state, the cost could exceed $250,000, depending on where you were able to get approval to deliver them to. Now, I understand through discussions with a couple of folks at the North Country Environmental Services landfill that they have approximately 150 vendors, many of them municipalities, that deliver to their landfill currently that a lot of us will seek to deliver to the new landfill if this House bill is opposed. And if it's not, we could be realizing costs for all of those other users of over $10 million to keep our trash in state. If everybody, the 150 users had to go out of state, you're looking at over $30 million of potential additional cost to all those users.
Senator Avard, that's 2.5 minutes.
Can you wrap it up in 30 seconds, Scott?
Yes. So my concern is that there may be significant costs towards the town of Sunapee and Springfield if this bill does pass, and for all of those other municipalities and users of the facility currently if this bill does not pass. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Scott. Questions from the committee? Thank you, Scott.
Next is Haley Jones.
Welcome, Haley.
Thank you so much, folks. My name is Haley Jones, and I'm the Vermont and New Hampshire organizer for Community Action Works campaigns. And we urge you to support HB 177 to prohibit permits for new landfills within 2 miles of state parks. Let me give you some context on Community Action Works. We believe that environmental threats are big, but that the power of well-organized communities is bigger. And that's why we work side by side with everyday people to confront polluters and seed solutions for communities. So we work with folks most impacted by environmental problems, all too often working class, Black, Indigenous, POC communities, training folks with the know-how that anyone would need to make change in their own backyard. And Community Action Works has been around since 1987. We've worked with over 1,000 communities to prevent and clean up pollution. And we've been working for years with folks in the North Country and the surrounding areas to protect their communities from the dangerous health impacts of burning and burying trash. And that's why we're here today. I won't say more facts that you already know, except to note that the EPA says all landfills inevitably leak. You're looking at lead, arsenic, toxic chemicals like PFAS migrating into your water supplies. That's dangerous for your ecosystems. Sorry, that's my cat. Dangerous for your ecosystems and for the health of your communities. We're already seeing a lawsuit in Bethlehem. 2018 residents sued Casella after the company discharged illegal pollutants into the Ammonoosuc River. And we really can't afford such incidences near our invaluable parks and trails. And just finally, we're also seeing that landfills release noxious gases that threaten people's quality of life. You're seeing sulfides, ammonia, and non-methane organic compounds from landfills that have been linked to headaches and nausea in surrounding communities. And here in Vermont, we've seen residents have long complained about foul odors from the Coventry landfill, citing health issues and decreased property values. So we really think that given that odors from landfills can easily travel 5 miles, permitting landfills near state parks would actually decrease tourism and discourage local folks from recreating. So we're saying, please vote ought to pass on HB 177 to protect the state's parks from air and water pollution, because your constituents are coming to you. They're asking you to protect their health and environment, and it's really up to you to keep new landfills away from our invaluable green spaces. Thank you so much for your time and for your service.
Questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony.
Okay, so at this point, I'm going to go through the list of people who signed up to speak, but who I don't see in the Zoom. Alan Rashkin, Ryan Gould, Celeste Goodhue, Amy Turner, Brian Warwick, Christine Sundman, Milton Brown, Pam Lads, Phyllis Bellavance, Roger Doucette, Peter Essie, Mike Colbeth, Matt Leahy, and that's all that I had on my list, and that's gotten a couple of hands up.
All right.
Sarah Doucette, who I believe is Roger.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear us?
Yes.
Yeah, here's
Yes,
Roger.
I'm Roger Doucette. I live in Whitefield, New Hampshire, and I thank you for my brief statements. I just want to say I'm in favor of 177. And I want to say that we're not saying that landfills cannot be placed in New Hampshire like a lot of these people are worried about higher tipping fees and shipping waste and all of that stuff. What we're saying is it's a poor idea to site a landfill next to a park, because the problem is, in spite of all the regulations and all the best intentions of engineers and everything, problems still exist with landfills. They eventually all leak. There's always blowing trash. There's scavengers. There's odors. Treatment for PFAS and stuff. All the leachate that goes into our water treatment systems in the state eventually end up in our rivers. And the toxins are still within the state. So we bring in toxins as well as trash that are then put into our state. And, it's just, in spite of all the regulations, without the oversight and the manpower to enforce these regulations, it does no good. I mean, problems exist and will continue to exist until things are better done. And this would be a good time to pause and take a step back. And in the meantime, protect our state parks while something better is figured out and the regulations that are needed are in place. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions from the committee?
Made it under the wire.
Seeing none.
Okay, I see Christine Sundman is here. Christine?
Welcome, Christine.
Christine, it looks like you're unmuted.
Christine, can you press *9 or what do you do here?
It looks like you're actually on the Zoom. Christine, it looks like you just unmuted.
You there?
All right, I guess she is not.
Okay.
Let's see. Lisa Tollitson.
Welcome, Lisa.
Lisa, you should be able to unmute yourself.
This is not Lisa Tillotson. This is Brian Gould. She's our office manager, and I guess this account is under her name.
Welcome, Brian.
Thank you, Senator. So my name is Brian Gould. I'm a lawyer with Cleveland, Waters and Bass in Concord. I've had the privilege of representing the New Hampshire subsidiaries of Casella Waste Systems for close to 30 years. A lot of my testimony, because I'm coming here at the end, has already been addressed, and I'm mindful that you don't want me to plow the same ground. So I'm going to just try to touch on a couple of things quickly. First of all, we've heard how this is just a simple concept that even sixth graders can understand it and so forth. But as a Senate committee, I know you're aware that life is much more complicated than simple desires. And one of the things that has to be weighed in all of this is there in fact a waste disposal crisis? We have just had to do an analysis of that in connection with the Granite State landfill application. The DES is forecasting that there are going to be 40 million tons of trash, over 40 million tons of trash generated in the state over the next 20 years. It assumes a 25% recycling rate, meaning that over 30 million tons will require disposal. Right now, New Hampshire has, it depends on how you measure it, but it has between 7.5 million and 21.5 million tons of waste disposal capacity over that same 20-year period. So even if you assume that all waste in New Hampshire is going to all the waste disposal facilities in New Hampshire, and those facilities aren't taking waste from anywhere else, that's a shortfall of 9 million to 23 million tons over the 20-year period. But as a couple of people have alluded to, over 1 million tons per year of non-New Hampshire waste is sent to New Hampshire disposal facilities. About 80% of it goes to the Turnkey facility in Senator Gray's district. The shortfall, therefore, would increase over 20 million tons over that 20-year period. So one of the things you have to take into account is, are we going to be running out of waste capacity? The other thing to keep in mind, and I asked you to investigate.
Sorry to interrupt, Senator Avard, that's 2.5 minutes.
All right, Brian, can you wrap it up in 30 seconds?
Aside from that, I also want to address this constitutionality argument. Although property rights have not been afforded a great deal of protection under court decisions, you still have to have a rational basis for any distinction drawn in statute. A setback of 100 feet between the landfill and adjoining property and 500 feet between the landfill and any property that has a residence on it or that is zoned residential is in the rules right now. If this bill is passed, it would be permissible to site a new landfill 500 feet from a residential neighborhood and 200 feet from any lake, but not to site it within 2 miles of a state park where no one lives and only visitors are present. I ask you to consider whether that is a rational distinction that this bill would create in New Hampshire law. Thank you for your time.
Questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much, Brian.
Okay, and then I have David Sunman, who I think is Christine trying to get to us again. Are you able to unmute at this point? Are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we got you.
Okay, sorry. I had to go to another appliance. My name is Christine Sunman, and I have been a resident of Northern New Hampshire for 49 years. Raised in Littleton, where we also raised our family. We have owned a home and spent our summers on Forest Lake in Dalton for the last 35 years. We have a daughter now who's building a house on the lake so that her children can have the same summers that she had as a child. My husband learned to swim in Forest Lake when his family spent summers there, and this was in 1955, as did our children. We share the lake with moose, bear, deer, and a fox who recently moved next door. We pick blueberries, watch the hummingbirds, and row on the lake. We hear the happy sounds of swimmers coming from the public beach in the summer and the hum of snowmobiles on the frozen lake in the winter. Ice fishermen, skiers, snowshoe hikers, boaters, and swimmers all enjoy this lake year-round. All of this is threatened by the proposed landfill in Dalton, which abuts the state-owned property at Forest Lake. The proposed area of the landfill is actually almost the same size as Forest Lake. It is also in the watershed of the Ammonoosuc River. The landfill in Bethlehem is just a few miles away. Are we really willing to turn the North Country into one large trash receptacle? Are we willing to have our water polluted, our roads congested with heavy trucks, our air filled with odors and trash-picking birds? I am not willing to sacrifice the natural beauty and wildlife of this wonderful area. I ask that you please vote ought to pass on House Bill 177. Please vote to preserve our natural resources in the North Country and the whole state. Please vote to save our tourism industry, our water, our wildlife, our beaches, our boating, our hiking trails, our winter sports, and our connection with nature. We have so much to lose if this bill is not passed. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me. Please do not sell the White Mountains to the highest bidder. Remember, the mountains are there for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions from the committee? Seeing none.
Senator Avard, that is everyone I had who wanted to speak for the first time.
If I can have Senator Erin Hennessey wrap up some final thoughts for the Senate and for her views. And then I would like to leave I'd like to hear again from the DES at the end and maybe some final statements. But Senator Hennessey, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I figured it'd be fair to give you an opportunity to give some final remarks.
Great. I really appreciate it. Thank you. And thank you, committee members and Griffin and Cameron, for all your dedication to this today. I appreciate you allowing me the rest of my time. I did forget to mention that my daughter and I both learned to paddleboard at Forest Lake State Park. So it's a precious place in my memories. Some things that I didn't neglected to mention previously also is that while I agree DES has ways to control some nuisance conditions, these nuisances can and will happen. And that's why other states who have also have mitigation controls for nuisances have enacted the buffer zones around their parks. And also just a reminder, this does not ban landfills in New Hampshire. So other municipalities that are looking for places to get rid of their trash are welcome to investigate or plan other projects in the state. What it does is just requires people and companies to be, and municipalities to be more thoughtful about where the landfill locations will be. And so thank you very much. I really appreciate you allowing me time to come back with you.
Excuse me, questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you, Senator. Appreciate your hard work. Let's see, DES, is Mike Wimsett still available?
Let me see. Yes, he is. Mike, you should be able to unmute.
Yes.
Mike, thank you. I wanted to give you an opportunity to if there's something that you wanted to rebut or give some final statements. There were some accusations. DES doesn't abide by federal law, 100-foot bearing, 9% out of state circulation, a host of things. I don't know if you were taking any notes, but I wanted to give you an opportunity. When people lay charges, I like the people being, those charges being levied against, have an opportunity to respond. So if you have any final statements, you're welcome to speak up.
Thank you, Senator. I guess one thing I would comment on is I did hear the commenters reference to federal law related to distance of landfills to airports. Our program is approved as an approved program by the federal government, that it's equivalent to the federal requirements. That is the first time I've heard that suggested, and I can tell you I made note of it. I'm going to look into that and run that to ground, because obviously if there's any part of our rules that don't comport with federal requirements, we want to be aware of that and address it. Beyond that, I do want to emphasize that the agency is neutral on this bill. We're not taking a position on the bill, and that is in large part because we have two applications before us right now. One for our wetlands program and one for our solid waste program for the Granite State landfill proposed for Dalton. So it's just not appropriate for me or anyone in the agency to be opining specifically on that in the context of this bill. I'm happy to answer any additional questions, but I really don't have any other further comments.
I just have one question with regards to Brian Gold said something to the effect that we do have a crisis on our hands, and that has to do with capacity. Is that hyperbole, or is that real?
Yeah, so thank you for the question. So this is an area where for many, many years, you can, and I think one of your other folks who testified made an important note, and that is when we talk about capacity, and in fact, the capacity analysis that the agency has to do when it reviews a landfill permit application, we only look at currently permitted capacity. That means capacity at operating landfills that currently has approval to operate. So those timelines that I gave you in my prior testimony about how long those landfills could operate is based on what they're currently permitted. And to be clear, when we permit a facility, we not only, we expect the public benefit determination is in many cases predicated on a certain service life for the facility. So when I said that the Turnkey landfill was expected to operate until 2034, it's not just us saying, yeah, we think they'll last that long. Under the terms of their permit, they are to provide capacity for the people of the state until 2034. And you can say the same for any of these other approvals of capacity. So I'm just a little roundabout to answer your question, but I had to lay that out there because in essence, if you describe a crisis, it assumes that, well, you need X amount of something and you only have Y. But the reality is that we haven't made all the permit decisions that we will make for the next 20 years. So, in the case of the Turnkey landfill, it has a current permit through 2034. That is only, 13 years out. And the other two facilities that currently have permits that are for 3 to 4 years or 5 years. That doesn't mean that we won't receive and act on permit applications to expand capacity. So I, as the director of the Waste Division, have always been loath to describe a capacity crisis because I think you have to understand it in the context of how we can talk about capacity. It's not appropriate for me as a representative of the agency and a permitting authority to prejudge or anticipate a certain amount of capacity. Our job is to react to proposed applications for facilities and act on them accordingly. So when we talk about capacity, it's only appropriate for us to talk about currently permitted capacity.
So Sunapee and Springfield, that testimony from Scott Hazelton, he was talking about capacity and if, I don't know, is it Bethlehem? Is that the one that could be closing in 5 years? If that's the case.
Reference that they used the NCES facility in Bethlehem.
Okay, so if that's the case, then they will have in themselves a crisis, a financial one at least, having to ship it to either Turnkey or out of state. And it varies from 75,000 additional to 30 million. That to me is a crisis. But my question to you is, what is the time frame to develop a permit process in the first place? How long does it take for that to happen? And what is the cost to the people who are going to run it?
I'm sorry, could you
the timeline to have a permit approved?
Well, for a brand new landfill that is sited on a greenfield, in other words, it's not an expansion of existing facility, there's a substantial period of time that certainly that I'm sure these applicants would tell you they spent a lot of time preparing to submit an application. And
years? Is it years?
In total, sure. I think that's an accurate statement, right? I think it's probably 3 to 4 years to from conception to getting a decision, or it could be a little less, could be a little longer. Depends on the circumstances of the particular facility.
And local opposition and could interrupt that as well, depending upon not my backyard. Yeah, interesting. All right. Questions from the committee? None? Come on, none. All right. Thank you very much, Mike. I really appreciate your testimony and you sticking with us for this amount of time. We appreciate all that you do.
You're welcome. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, and seeing how we have nobody else to testify or raise hands, I will
We do have a couple of hands speaking a second time.
I'm going to close the hearing at this point. I think the people on the Senate committee has definitely been patient. So I'm at this point, I will be closing the hearing on 177. And
I'm sure, Mr. Chairman, that anyone that wants to provide any additional information can do that by email.
Yes, we're getting plenty of those and it works. So that being said, we're going to close the hearing. And is there a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Senator Gray,
Yes.
Senator Waters,
Yes.
Senator Perkins Quokka. Senator Perkins Quokka.
She might have left, Senator. If you recall, she said she had to leave at 4:30.
That is correct. So Senator Avard, yes. So with that, thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for your testimonies and for speaking out. And
thank you, Mr. Chairman. You asked all the right questions, so we didn't have to. And
that's
and I'm really glad, Mr. Chairman, that we found a way to get everybody to have a chance to come before us today. It's a long hearing, but I really, I learned an awful lot, and we really have a lot before us. And so I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman.
we do. And thank you. And I'm surrounded by some very good folks, so we will handle this properly, I'm sure. Until then, we'll see you all later. Good job, Cameron. You are the marshal.